Okay, everyone, welcome. Thank you for the great discussion last Saturday. This is our second budget meeting focusing on our capital side. So, Ms. Merritt, if you'd be kind enough to take it on. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Good morning. As the mayor said, today does bring us to our second budget workshop out of 3. Last week we covered the operating funds, and just as a follow-up to that, we are continuing as staff to work through your follow-up questions from last week, and I know we had a couple of different analyses that we needed to put together for you. We're working on that, and we will have that sent out to everyone electronically on next Thursday morning, so that you have a couple days to review it before next Saturday. Today, we're going to talk about our capital funds first, and then I will turn it over to Clay to go through the actual proposed CIP. And then next week, again, we'll do the city administrator's work plan and your follow-ups. All right, our capital program, our capital projects, typically they cost more than $5,000, and we need them to have a useful life of 5 years or more. We have several different funding sources that we can use to fund our capital items. Typically, these are bonds or other operating revenues. The operating revenues would come from things like the debt service levy, LST, which is our local sales tax, road use tax, our enterprise funds, which would be our sewer, solid waste, and clean water. And I know we talked some about that last week, about the cash balances in those and why we need to grow them so that they can pay for the debt that's associated there. And then lastly, our grants and partnerships. We've had, I would say, very good success over the last several years in this area, and that's really provided some relief to our capital program. All right, we'll start out here with the debt service fund. The levy amount for this fund is $2.05 per $1,000 of taxable value. This levy is restricted for the purposes of funding our principal and interest payments that are associated with our annual debt service. So that's the only thing that we can use this fund for. The state limits our debt to 5% of our gross assessed valuation, and right now we're at 58.37% of that, which is the lowest that it's been since 2009. Our debt service fund here, you can see the cash balance in this chart. It has continued to grow over time. We're at the point now where we're pretty satisfied with where it is. We do have PFM, as I mentioned last week. PFM keeps a very close eye on this for us. Every time that we do a GO issuance, they're looking closely at this to make sure that we have the right amount of cash on hand for that issuance. So we just had our debt service analysis refreshed, I would say, less than a month ago, and this was still tracking, and they were okay with where these levels were.
Sorry.
Please use the mic.
I know, I was waving to Corey. With a potential new, and it may not be at this point, I'm supposed to ask this, but I'm going to ask while I think of it. Legislation may provide some money to state and local governments because of COVID. And are we thinking about, if we get some of that money, what we might be doing with it? Is there anybody thinking about it?
What related to?
Federal legislation, federal legislation as part of the COVID stimulus. They've been trying to get money to state and local governments who might be in trouble. And I'm just wondering if we've been thinking about that. Because it's in the most recent legislation.
So we've been talking through that for probably 6 months. I don't think there's a high likelihood of that happening, particularly in our case where we do have such a strong revenue position.
Okay.
But should we get an allocation, at the end of the day, that's a little bit of a policy decision because that would be one-time money.
Yes.
But I wouldn't predict a high likelihood of that actually happening for us.
Okay, thank you.
All right, moving on to local option sales tax. This revenue source comes from a referendum that was passed in 1988. So with our local sales tax funds, 60% of what we collect goes straight to our debt service fund. So that's an automatic transfer that happens there. And then 40% is available for capital investment. And this comes through 1% of the gross sales. So 1% of the gross sales within Scott County are then redistributed back to the cities based on a formula that the state sets. So this chart.
Sorry, Mallory.
Yeah, hey, guys, if you got some, raise your hand and just jump in.
Sorry, Mallory. And what percentage of that 1% do we get?
I cannot tell you that. This formula is
Does it vary every
not very transparent. So we get what we get. They usually provide a true-up payment. If there is anything left over, that comes in the fall. And I'll show you that here in just a second of why this funding source is a little volatile for us, but we do plan for that.
So who would know that number? Would it be Scott County?
No, so the state does not disclose their formula. We have called and asked about that. Recently, I think, Basha, you called this fall to try to get more information on it, correct? Yeah, and they do not disclose their formula.
I and others have asked for them to do that,
Yep.
but they won't.
All right, our revenue source here, the blue line is what we've actually collected, and the red line is what we budget. So as you can see, because of kind of the uncertainty around this, we know that this revenue source performs strongly, but it does have a little bit of uncertainty tied to it. So we're always very conservative in how we budget this revenue source. So again, you'll see that we budget that the red line is where we budget, and then the blue line is what we actually collect. All right, our expenditures within this fund, the majority, again, the 13.9, which is the teal box, it's on your sheet as non-departmental expenses. What that really means is it's transfers. So the majority of that is transferred, again, to our debt service levy and then also to our capital program for projects. There's a little bit of salaries there, which are salaries usually at Public Works, and then some equipment purchases. Our cash balance in this fund is right around that 10 million mark. You'll see that leveled out between 19 and 20. This is another one that PFM looks at because of its connection to our debt, and we're happy with where that's at. So I would imagine that you'll start to see that line just kind of continue to flatten. All right, our road use tax fund, this is established by the state, and about 20% of what they collect is distributed back to the cities. These revenues can only be used on maintaining and improving our street network system, so it is pretty restrictive there. In 15, you may remember the state did pass a 10-cent per gallon increase, which produces roughly an extra 1.6 million for the city. At the time, the council direction on this was that anything extra that got produced should be returned to the CIP. So that's what happens here. You'll see that 1.6 in the CIP, which is directly tied to this increase.
When you say system, does that mean the sewers beneath? Does it mean the sidewalks? What does systems mean?
In this case, the actual streets, curb to curb.
Okay.
Yep.
So nothing else, no, okay, thanks.
All right, the revenues in this fund, again, these have continued to perform very strong. This is another one, we didn't put the budget line on here, but this one also we budget very conservatively on. The state does give us a number that they give us every year through the Iowa League of Cities, and we usually budget a couple dollars below that. We can get you the, it's a per capita number, so we'll put that in your report. All right, our road use tax fund, salaries and benefits equate to about 8 million of this fund. The CIP projects, that's what I was just referencing, that's the 1.6 million. There's supplies and services at 2.7, that includes our salt purchase. So that's what's taking up the majority of that. And our fund balance here is just a little bit below 3 million. This is one that we're not overly interested in, and I would say growing this fund balance kind of excessively. The purpose of these funds are really to be invested back into the street system.
Salaries and benefits out of this fund typical, or how do we compare to some other?
I would say yes. We can run a little comparison though against a couple of cities and let you know, but this is the primary funding source for funding a lot of our streets area at Public Works and those that are working on road projects, engineers, that type of thing.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
All right, and that concludes kind of the overview of the capital funds. If there are no questions, I will turn it over to Clay to go through the actual CIP.
Thank you, ma'am.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Clay Merritt, and I am oversee the city's capital improvement program. So as we go through this, before jumping straight into the projects, I want to kind of go over the 6-year program from a numbers perspective. Let's see. So the first, before jumping straight into those numbers, we do have some highlights as we go forward. One of these things is, I think people joke around with me that I get really excited for these things, is because I think we have a really good story to tell every year when we do our capital program, and here's some of those highlights. So one of the things the council and the mayor has continually challenged staff over is finding more and more money to invest into our infrastructure. So this proposed budget has a little over $33 million in our street network and our sewer collection system, which is up a little over like 4.6 million from the current fiscal year, which typically was higher than normal. So we continue to invest heavily in our infrastructure. We got about 1.5 million for park investment. So making sure we don't forget about the quality of life amenities that we have in this community. One of the signature ones for this upcoming year is about 800,000 for Veterans Memorial Park. And once again, we'll touch on all of these a little more specifically as we go on throughout the day. Continued public safety capital investment. So about $1 million for a fire apparatus replacement. Those things are a little pricey, and we're making sure that we allocate funding every year to make sure we keep those important vehicles on the road. A new one in there is $400,000 for the Fire Station 3 design and relocation project. In the last calendar year, we acquired property. And so this puts money into the budget to put a design together so we can continue to move that project forward. So looking at the 6-year program, just taking a step back, the city produces a 6-year capital program. Year 1, in this case, fiscal year 2022, is the year in which projects are funded. Years 2 through 6, so 23 through 27, is considered a plan. And every year, we come before the city council and update that plan. But years 2 through 6 are able to show the community, here's what we're looking to do into the future. So 2022 is a little over $47 million, and you can kind of see it steadily between the high 30s and low 40s. A lot of that has to do with the timing of grants and how we go through those. So when you see some swings like in between 22 and 23, that's almost completely due to a grant source. Next, you'll see this is kind of a pie chart of how the 22 funds are split up. The largest section that you'll see in in dark blue is our streets. Like the light blue, water pollution control plant, and then the third largest is an orange color. It's our sewers, or specifically our sewer category. So you can kind of see, once again, streets and sewer collection system make up a large section of our capital investment. Yes, sir.
I just want to thank you very much for emphasizing that to anybody who's viewing or any of our media folks. As the citizen survey said, and all our citizens continue to ask us to put the emphasis on streets. Again, increase in the funding in millions of dollars and a big part of the CIP. We hear you, and that's what we're doing. Thank you.
So if we look at it from a programmatic perspective or from a category perspective, you can kind of see some of the numbers that's in the 22 budget, not the 6-year, but just the 22. Just some highlights from those. Continue investments into our own assets, so we can able to continue to provide services to the community. So facility maintenance, a little over 3.2 million. Our fleet, 2.7. General government, 2.8. A lot of those are programs that the council has initiated. A DREAM program is one of them that is funded within that category. Pedestrian transportation, a little over $1 million. The riverfront, 1.6. Sewers, 7 million. Streets, 15.1 million. And then the water pollution control plant, 10 million.
Clay, the water pollution control plant, that is, when that's done, it's done, is that correct?
So
I mean, I understand that you have to continue to, but this is, I guess this is not like a street in that we have to keep replacing streets. Right?
I would say that the amount of infrastructure we have, and then over time that other agencies, whether they be state or federal, continue to put, I guess you could call them mandates on us to be able to perform to meet certain standards that are evolving over time. We will continue to be investing into that facility, whether it's through new things, which we're doing right now, where we're building an ultraviolet disinfection facility as part of our current infrastructure, or just replacing large-scale pieces of equipment. So that will be an ongoing cost every year.
And Clay,
At that level?
Not at that particular level. As we'll dive in, probably 9 million of that is tied to a federal grant that we feel pretty strongly that we can get. It's probably more, on average, if we're just talking just city costs, probably in the $1.5 to $2 million range. The last couple of years have been a little higher than normal because of those state mandated projects. The UV project was one of them that we needed to do.
Clay, sorry to bug. So in the highlights, we have 33.6 million for streets and sewer projects, but then when you look at this breakdown, and maybe it adds on the next sheet, I apologize if I got this wrong. So we look at streets, 15.1, sanitary sewer, 7, stormwater, 1. I'm just curious, in that 33.6, out of these categories, what all adds up into that 33.6? So my math works.
No, that's a really good question. So when you're looking at the report by category, which is what this slide provides you, and the streets. So when it says streets, that's the 15.1. Street network, we also add bridges in there. We add traffic engineering, so anything that's actually tied to a street. Same with the sewer collection system. So it's sanitary sewer, it's the storm sewer system, and it's the water pollution control plant. It's all part of a larger collective instead of individuals. So if you add those numbers up, you get to the 33 million. Next, I find this one useful. It's the reports by funding source. We just gave you an updated version. Essentially, one project switched between a local sales tax project and an equipment bond. It was our sanitary sewer maintenance division's CCTV camera crawler system that switched. But this gives you an idea. Not all projects can be funded in the same manner. So we have about $7 million for bonds abated by our sewer fund. Our largest one is 17 million from our general obligation bonds. And then you can see local sales tax, which Mallory was talking about, at 3.9, and that road use tax 1.6 is in that capital program. I would also make a comment off of last week's presentation. This will be the first year that we have money from the parking fund in there. So we started putting money in there to start performing maintenance items. So that's exciting for us to see. We'd like to show this slide the last couple of years just to see what that street category looks like over time as we continue that investment. In particular, I like to look at the maintenance programs. Grants will shift from time to time as we are successful in acquiring state or federal grants. But really, it's those maintenance line items that we've kind of gotten direction from the council to keep steady or increase. And so you can see those. Neighborhood repair, for instance, in 2020 was at 2.3, now it's at 4.45. High volume program was at 4.6, then it went to 5.6, and it's back to 4.6. You'll see what we did in this proposed budget is we actually, from hearing from the council and hearing from the community, we kind of shifted some allocation from the high volume to repair. In the end, the dollar figure stayed the same between both of them combined. But you kind of see that shift in emphasis back into our neighborhood streets.
Clay, neighborhood repair, can you talk about that a little bit?
So that is a combination of two things. First is there's some funding in there for our internal street maintenance crews. So it's the work that they can perform. They are a little constrained a little about what they can do. A lot of it comes from the state of the type of work they can perform, as well as type of equipment we have, our own expertise. So that is what I put on there. The proposed street plan is what they can do. And they're mainly tied to asphalt roadways. Our contracted, however, which I'm gonna say that from the neighborhood street is about 3 million in the recommended budget. That's one where we can go out and we can have contractors generally perform whichever ones that we select. So it's kind of a combination of the two.
So I see we're going big time on alley repair. Can you talk about that a little bit?
So our alley repair program, as currently situated from direction from the city council, is that if you are residential property and you're interested in your alley repair, there's a 50-50 cost share program that we have. A lot of times we get requests from people and we walk them through the process. Oftentimes, generally, it's a fairly lengthy process because it includes an assessment. We generally perform about 2 to 3 alleys per year under the current guidelines that's been set forth. Under that estimation and looking how we're trending from a financial perspective, we have current funds to be able to still accomplish those things under the current trends for our expenses.
So Clay, the majority of the alleys are from Locust Street south. And the condition of these alleys, as you well know, is horrible. What about maintenance on these alleys? Is that coming out of your 200,000 too?
It is not. Maintenance will come directly out of the operating budget. So the budget that we discussed last week.
So after 5 years of talking about alleys, have we developed any type of strategy to improve the maintenance on them?
I think from a lot of the ones I think that you're referring to, when it comes down to when an alley needs full reconstruction, I'm going to steal Brian Shadd's quote here. An alley is essentially a minor street when it comes to looking at it. There is no silver bullet per se on how to fix them. In some instances, in many instances, they just need to be fully reconstructed. And that has an associated cost with it. And under the current guidance and policies that we have, that's split between the neighbors and the city. And that's how we've been operating off of.
My concern is we have a lot of locally owned small businesses that are impacted by the alleys when you go from Locust Street south. We even heard from our friends in downtown Davenport and the importance of the alley infrastructure down there and the condition of it. And I know administration is a little tired of me talking about the importance of our alleys. But if the condition of our alleys are so bad that businesses, becomes more and more of a struggle for them to take care of their customers because the only access they have is through the alleys. I guess I don't understand why there's been such a fear of dealing with our alleys from Public Works and the administration over the last few years.
Yes, sir. Alderman Dunn.
Well, number one, Ray, it comes down to money. So, I mean, if you want to really go through the budget and maybe cut out some of these projects, that we don't really, that are maybe not as important as alleys, I'd be glad to look at them.
Well, I don't want to micromanage what our professional staff does, but, the alleys have a tremendous impact to our core neighborhoods, particularly south of Locust Street. And,
I don't want to micromanage them either. I think they do a fantastic job, but, there's only so much money, Ray.
All right, thank you. So this is one of those topics that kind of got shuttered by COVID because we were supposed to have a work session on this last year. And I really thought that this would be the budget where we got after a different way of doing alleys. So as I was tracking the two policy items related to this that we wanted to discuss was, can the businesses take part in a 50-50 type of program to replace their alleys? There was some interest in that, I think from Alderman Ambrose, myself included, probably others. I'd still like to look at that. The other B is the impetus for replacing the alley. So right now you have to get 51% of the neighbors. Typically how the conversation goes with me is a neighbor reaches out to me, says, I'd like to replace my alley because it's in bad shape. I explain the process to them and they say, no, thank you, and walk away. And then they might call me a year later with the same complaint. I explain the process to them, they walk away. So we've talked about a different process for potentially evaluating the alleys and then saying, this is an alley that needs to be replaced unless you get X percentage of your neighbors who say, we don't want to pay for a new alley, we're going to put in the alley. And then I think thirdly their C part of this conversation is potentially, if we do view alleys as an extension of our street network, and in some parts of the city, I think that's a very strong argument, then potentially you expand that alley budget a little bit and probably through, neighborhood streets or some of those street budgets, you take a little bit out of there to do the alleys because in my opinion, you put a brand new alley in some of these neighborhoods, our heritage neighborhoods, and they view that as you just upgraded my street network. So I'd like to get to this work session so the council can weigh in on at least those three things. But I was hearing pretty strong direction from my colleagues last year that was a big conversation we were going to have, and we were never able to meet on it. Thanks.
Alderman Dorman.
Yeah, that was just exactly what I was going to say also, is that I asked last management update meeting to get that alley work session added back, and I think it is very clear that that's still a extremely important work session for us to have.
Alderman Peacock.
I have a two-part question, Clay, and I truly appreciate the attempt at the response to Alderman Ambrose's question, but can you try to somehow, some way answer his question directly? If I heard him correctly, this conversation has been a 5-year conversation. Of course, I've only been on the council for a year. However, the question still stands. Is there some type of progress? What is the way forward to address the alleyways? And can you answer that question first before I answer my second question?
So Alderman Peacock, I'll kind of chime in. Brian had been working on a white paper to present during a work session. The primary issue right now is that we have 1,300 alleys in the city, and the current policy, how we have it written, is that it's the 50-50. So until we have a policy change, we're continuing to follow the policy that the council had set forth. The second thing is, once we do, or if we make a policy change, that alleys are funded differently. As Alderman Grip mentioned, that would pretty much 100% come out of neighborhood streets. So at any given time, we have, 50 or so streets we're prioritizing for neighborhood streets. We would then be adding 1,300 alleys on top of that. So out of the same pocket of money. So really the stuck for the last, I think, 5 years has been, it's a decision of, do you want to take that neighborhood street money away, and that program is just a recently started one, and shift it to alleys. And alleys, as Alderman Grip also mentioned, some of them act more like driveways and some of them act more like streets. So you would likely need to evaluate those 1,300 and then decide, is it a driveway or is it a street? So it's a very complex issue.
Thank you. To backtrack, I'm looking ahead and I can see Clay's about to go into the actual individual projects, but I have a question about streets, Clay. My question for you is this. As someone who does budgets for a living, and particularly my question about streets is this. As we put more money into these streets, I'm looking about the way ahead. Do we put money just into fill a pothole? Do we look into just broaden streets? what about new technology? So we don't put good money after bad money. What are we doing futuristically wise to maybe have new technology, look at things, how to perhaps better a road? Can you please speak to that?
Yes, so one of the good things is our engineering division meets very often with the what I want to call the Concrete Association and Asphalt Association. They're constantly bringing us different technologies that are being used throughout the country or the region. One always advances their own, one for concrete, one for asphalt. A couple of them that we've utilized the last couple of years that I think we've seen success with. One of them is the crack and seat. This is where I think last year we did West 60th Street, sections of 46th Street and Marquette. Essentially, instead of removing the existing pavement, we have a specialized machine that comes there and busts it up in a specialized manner, and then we just overlay on top. So you're actually raising the profile of the road. There is some criteria for that. For instance, you need enough curb height. You need to make sure that you're not replacing all your driveway approaches throughout, or that you're creating a drainage issue, because then if you're going to go through and replace all driveway approaches, you lose the speed and the cost savings associated with that particular treatment. But we've seen some success with that one because it goes a lot faster than much faster than a typical reconstruction. It's also much cheaper. I would say that 46th Street project from Harrison to about, it wasn't quite Northwest Boulevard where we stopped. It may have cost us, I'm going to ballpark it here, about $700,000, $700,000. If that was a full reconstruction, it's many millions, and it would have taken the entire year to do that instead of the 3 to 4 weeks that it took. That's one of them, and we have a couple of street projects in the proposed plan that are these crack and seat. Forest is one of them, and then Cedar Street. To be perfectly honest, I don't know how we would even get to those streets outside of full reconstruction, and the sheer cost of those, I think, would just continue to push it down the road. So that's one of the ones we do. We've been pretty heavy in our microsurfacing and cape sealing programs the last probably 5 years. That's where we put down the thin asphalt emulsion spray. That isn't a permanent treatment. It probably extends the life cycle of a road 3 to 5 to 6 years. But the idea is that you're gonna see us come back and continuing to use that one. So if we can extend, from a $10 a square yard cost standpoint, and we can continue to extend the life of a pavement cycle by 5-year increments, that's a cost savings instead of having to come back going, well, I need to resurface it or reconstruct it at $75 or $120 a square yard. So there are areas that we're constantly looking at to try and improve that instead of continuing the way that we've done it in the past.
You good, Alderman Peacock? You have more?
I'm good, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Spiegel, unless there's anybody else.
I do, Mike.
I'm sorry, Alderman Ambrose.
I'd like to circle back around to the alleys. Yeah, sure, we have alleys that need to be completely reconstructed because of the horrible condition they are. But the fact that the majority of our alleys are Locust Street and south of Locust Street, and a wise man told me a little bit about the smart city and the commitment to the older neighborhoods, the older business districts, and the huge economic impact it has compared to new development. So for the city to make a stronger commitment, not so much to rebuild the alleys, but just to maintain them, that would be a huge improvement right there. A commitment to maintain our alleys in the neighborhoods, Locust Street and south. And I think it would have a huge commitment to the businesses when they saw the city working hard to make a commitment to the older neighborhoods and to the infrastructure, particularly the alleys. So that's my plea.
So I'll go back. I know a bunch of people want to talk, and I just ask Ms. Spiegel. I know we've been talking about a work session. It looks like, and I don't speak for everybody, certainly, but it seems most folks are comfortable getting together like we are today. And I know this has been a discussion to get this work session scared. So I guess I'll ask and work with you to let's make this happen pretty quickly on this alley work session, meeting, whatever we do. But please, everyone, consider, because we have talked about this before, and I know alleys is a concern, But as you heard Ms. Gleason, the policy change, if enacted, will take money from streets. Now, the level and what that is and how you do it and how we do it, or how they do it based on the policy that you guys decide, so be it. But we've talked about this a lot, and every time it comes down to, well, we just put neighborhood streets into the CIP 2 years ago, and now we're potentially going to reduce it and take it away. That's going to be a significant impact to our folks. Alleys, as everybody's saying, is an impact also, but just please understand the big impact, but the work session probably is needed soon. So Ms. Spiegel's nodding her head, and we'll do that. So let's see.
So Mike, back to the alleys.
No, Alderman Ambrose, I got you. There's other people want to talk to. I think we all know your point, right? I do. Alderwoman McGinnis. Alderwoman McGinnis.
Thank you, Your Honor. As a person who lives on an alley street, most of the people in 3-block area where I live can't get to their houses except for the alley. So I do understand this, and I am concerned about the quality of the alleys, and I don't want to take money away from neighborhood streets, because as I look at the list of proposed street work, what I see not on here are streets that are, 8th Street, from, Harrison all the way, you take it as far as you want, well, over to about Warren is, and it's a bus route, and it is horrible. It is full of patches and holes. But I understand, and my point is not that it's not, why it's not on here. It is that I know we have streets still waiting that you guys can't get on the list. To Alderman Grip's point, it may be, in terms of looking and evaluating alleys, and that's a policy change that we would decide whether we say this is going to be done. Just like we do with sidewalks. If they're out, we don't give people an option, and we look at it and we assess the properties, because one of the issues south of Locust, of course, is a very high number of rentals, and the people who own those rentals don't always live nearby their rentals, and so we've seen it at council where people have come in the last couple of years successfully and gotten the 51%, and the people objecting are often someone who has perhaps a rental property there. Now, I'm not saying that's always the case, but there tends to be, a little more probably concern about investing. So that's always going to be a problem south of Locust that will really make it more challenging and more difficult typically for homeowners within those neighborhoods to be able to go and actually get that 51%, because you just don't have the sometimes boots on the ground investment that you do in other parts of the city. So that's why that perhaps should be something we should consider in terms of a policy as well.
Thank you. Alderman Dunn, and then we'll move on because we're going to have a work session on alleys.
Thank you, John. I do agree with Alderman Ambrose. Alleys are very, very, very important. The problem is funding them. So as we look through this budget, Clay, when you go through project by project, why don't you point out some of these that we could probably shift the money instead of doing that project and do alleys, and then maybe we'll see which is more important to the council.
Okay, thank you everyone for your initial alley discussion. We'll get that set up for everybody, because this would be a significant change. So thank you.
Good discussion. The next is we as staff asked the city council for some feedback along our first draft of proposals for this budget. So I wanted to report to you what the summary of those were. We changed it. Every couple of years, we kind of change the nature of it. When we get feedback from the council that they want to do something a little different, we give it a try. So this one, we had asked for the council to provide us their top 10 projects over 6 years, regardless of category. And so this is what we've got back. What would the methodology behind it would be if Alderman Lee scored something as her highest, her number one project, it got a score of 10, her second highest was a 9, and so on and so on. And so everything was then totaled. In that thing, neighborhood street repair was significantly head and shoulders above all other projects, followed up by the Urban Revitalization Program, which funds the DREAM program at 47 votes, followed by high volume street repair, The Riverfront Flood Resiliency Program, which is the first time it is in there, was in the current year budget in '21. And then you can see there's some sewer ones and some other infrastructure-related ones. One I'll point out is the pedestrian transportation, so regional trail to Eldridge, that basically picks it up from Veterans Memorial Parkway all the way to Eldridge. That's in year 3, I believe. But that's a new project that was included. Main Street Landing, 11 votes. As we kind of walk through, influent infiltration removal for sanitary sewers, most of which we will touch base on as we go through the individual projects. And then obviously alley repairs is scored high as well.
But you see which is number 1, folks, so. Ms. Lee.
The City Hall air handler replacement, this is an old building. I'm not an HVAC engineer, okay, but we've got an old building, a new building. I'm sure that the system kind of got combined at some point. Right now, it's in, let's see, FY 2026. But with COVID, it's really important that we have airflow change like every 2 or 3 minutes. And I suspect that this HVAC system probably is not doing that. We have people just in chambers, you know, wearing your mask below your nose is just as dangerous to others as not wearing a mask at all. So even if you're far away, as air movement is slow, it's not protective. I would like to see because of COVID, I'd like to see the City Hall air handler replacement be moved up. I'd like to see it now, and it did rank pretty high on this list. So I think it's a safety issue, not necessarily just it's reaching the end of its life issue.
And then I'm going to work with our facility maintenance to get you kind of what that air circulation looks like.
And that's throughout the building, not just in chambers.
Yep.
That I'm concerned about.
Well, in chambers throughout the building, and then probably we'd also need to expand that to other facilities throughout the city.
That'd be great.
As we do that. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Remember, this was a scorecard for them to work on priorities, so you guys provided that.
Oh, I know, I just wanted to.
And kind of the summary for those is the top 5 projects, which you can see the score was a lot higher than some other ones. All of those projects were funded in the 2022 recommended budget, so you can see those ahead of you. 92% of the top 25 projects are in the 6-year program. Essentially, 2 projects were not. One project is upgrading the modems in our public safety vehicles. We're actually going to accomplish that using current fiscal year money. And then so the other project was a new asphalt paving machine. And kind of our conversations Nicole and I have had with our street maintenance division, they have some higher equipment priorities that we're funding in the proposed 2022 budget. So we're just going to wait for a couple of years on the asphalt machine and have that conversation again next year.
Clay, with that all kind of being said, and I know Alderwoman Lee's had some of these conversations with you, but I always find this really challenging to rank these projects, especially like facilities maintenance. So us being the kind of overseers of that, and we're not here day by day. We rarely ever go into public works, and we definitely probably don't go into the other smaller city buildings all throughout. It's hard to tell, you know, is a roof here more important than a roof at public works, or, you know, things like that. So I almost kind of view it as we as council would have a commitment to maintenance and maintaining and things like that, or we would use your judgment for those projects, and then we should be focused on ranking those kind of variable type projects where it's almost the fun money type of scenario. Because when we do these rankings, I am very committed to maintaining what we have and the assets we have, but when we're not here day to day, that gets kind of challenging. And that exact same story of what you kind of also just said there about a new asphalt paver, not knowing how the operations of that, how it could impact things. It's hard to rank that high or low, because I could see, if we get a new asphalt paver, that means we can pave ourselves 20 new roads a year because it's more efficient and effective, but I'm sure that's not the case. And so without having that backstory, I always find a lot of ranking of some of these stubs a little more challenging compared to some of those other kind of more variable type projects. So maybe if we could find a way to kind of focus in more on that, or divide it in different chunks for next year, I think that could be beneficial.
Ms. Lee?
Alderman Dorman. When I did it, to be perfectly honest, completely in solidarity with Alderman Dorman, I circled the things that this is what you need to run a city. And we've committed to these types of programs. So I circled all those. And then I said, now over and above that, these are the discretionary type things, like he was talking about, that I think are important, the top 10. So my rankings probably don't compare to anybody else's rankings this year, but it didn't make any sense for me to do high-volume streets against a park, let's say. So, or a particular sewer thing. So anyway, that's how I ranked it, and that's how I talked to you, and I wrote an email to everybody on council recommending that we change that process. So I'm the broken record on that.
Okay. Alderman Ambrose, and then Ms. Spiegel, and then me.
Thank you, Hunter. Clay, explain what the asphalt machine is you're talking about.
So our current paving machine for our street maintenance division, I don't recall the width of it, but it essentially takes on an average street 3 passes to put a single layer of asphalt down. This would be and it's only, I think the last one we purchased was about 6 years ago, but this would be purchasing a newer one that's wider. So from an efficiency perspective, we would be doing 2 passes on a normal one instead of 1. From a so it's a faster method, it's a more efficient method. From a long-term maintenance perspective, you're cutting down on the number of joints that you have in the middle of the street, so it's a less probability of failure, looking long-term, that kind of thing. I would say that that's one of the things too. I try to put a caveat when we provide the draft to the city council. It's what we get from our division managers and our department heads that's not filtered by the budget. So sometimes people ask for things going, using a sports reference, if you don't shoot, you don't score. If you don't ask, you'll never get something. But as we actually apply fiscal constraint to those requests, a lot of times some of these filter out or may not be year 1 projects. They may be more year 3 or 4 projects.
So Clay, for many years, I've suggested that the city purchase a machine where we can seal our streets. We contract that out and they come in, they do some patching and some sealing, but that seal usually lasts 3 to 5 years. Mm-hmm. But in order for the city to do a better job maintaining our streets and sealing the cracks, which ultimately lead to deterioration of our streets and alleys, if we were able to seal these cracks in-house, I think that would be the greatest investment for street maintenance we can do. As we look at what's happened on Locust Street and Central Park over the last years, that ceiling is being worn off by the traffic. But if the city could go down and reseal it every 2 or 3 years in-house, it'd be a tremendous investment. And then when we start patching and maintaining our alleys, we could also run the sealer down the alleys, and that would last longer. So I know the past public works director thought he could build a bricklaying machine out of public works that we never saw the light of day. But the number 1 practice of street maintenance is sealing the cracks. So we've talked about it in the past. I've talked about it with Nicole. So maybe we should continue to investigate what type of technology we could use to keep our cracks sealed on our streets. Thanks.
Ms. Spiegel.
So a little bit on the process. I can't remember if this is my 5th budget or 6th now, but every single year we change how we let you rank CIP based on your feedback. And sometimes we hear, I want to see every project that's submitted and I want to rank it. And then after you have that delightful experience that we get to do as staff, the feedback is, that was way too much. I don't even know what that means. I want to rank by program areas. And then we go back and forth and back and forth. So to Clay's credit, I think he's built a really good process based on 5 or 6 or 7 years, however many it's been, of trying to find where the middle of the council is, because some of you want to dive in and know everything about everything, and some of you want to say, streets and sewers, do those first. I don't want to talk about fun stuff at all. So I just want to remind you that there are 11 of you, and you all have very, very distinct preferences about how you want to do this, but we have to make it fair for all of you and consumable in a way that we can build you a CIP that actually meets the citizens' goals. We had a community survey this year, and tries to find the middle ground with the council as a body.
And I'll add, as a former alderman in 2 different places, I've seen all of those. I've seen meetings where we sit here, and Ambrose will remember, Dunn will remember, where we sit here for 10 hours and go through every freaking project, and it was absolutely inefficient, and it was terrible. I think what we need to remember is we're the policy folks, we're the program generation or provider of policy information and areas for them to do, whether it's neighborhood streets or alleys or whatever, and say, the council says, well, neighborhood streets are priority, and 2 years ago, there was no discussion. Quite frankly, that was the priority. There wasn't any other discussion. Now, alleys. Okay, so if the consensus is of the council, not of one person, then alleys become, and Ms. Spiegel execute. But we need to remember that we're the policy and the provider of the program management and priority to them. And then she goes with her staff and Ms. Gleason and executes those. So I'll just ask for that consideration. Thank you. Ms. McGinnis.
Yes, and one other thing about alleys, maybe as we start to think about this session that we're having, a useful thing for it might be some best practices across the country, how other cities are dealing with this, because I'm sure we're not the only one, and maybe somebody's got a great idea. So, thanks.
That's a good point. I've talked to, as Ms. Spiegel knows, I talked to all the mayors, and I'm on the Metro Coalition. We're much more in detail than many of those other cities, quite frankly. Much more. They let their people do it. They put the policy out and have a nice day. So just know that. We have that discussion at the Metro Coalition all the time.
Okay. So I'm.
Clay, is this a good time to stop and go get more coffee?
Are you at a kind of a spot? Yeah, okay. It's 9:20. Let's start back at 9:30.
still on the Mac.
All right, everyone, if we'd start heading back, please, to our seats. All right, Mr. Merritt, carrying on.
So now we're going to jump into, continue more of those conversations and look at projects individually. We're not going to go over all projects within the 6-year program, but just kind of hit some of the big ones. And you can, so I'm just going to roll straight through. Please stop me if you have any questions. If not, I'm just going to keep moving along. And we're going to do this from a category perspective, A all the way down to, so airport all the way down to water pollution control plant, just as we move forward. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question that dropped from the draft to the final, and it has to do with the lighting in here. There was a project for replacing the lighting in seats, and it dropped for the final. But the lighting in here is atrocious, and especially if you're watching it on video. And if we're going to keep doing video, which I think we should, even if COVID does something, I would really like to see some couch cushion money or something to replace the lighting in here. We don't have to do the seats right away, but the lighting, I think, is important.
I'll look into that cost.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Alderman.
Comment towards airport, which is more for Corey. Could we maybe have one of those special presentations that we do during management updates on the airport? Because I see this funding every year in the capital project, but I don't really know like the use of the airport and all the jazz with it. So I think that'd be a value add presentation.
Okay. As we go forward in kind of the middle to out years, in 2025 and 2026, we have funding for taxiway Alpha. So that is the one in orange on the screen, and then in Charlie, which is the one in blue, and design funding for that in 2027. The good things about the airport projects, typically almost all of them, we run through the FAA and to get funding for these things. So typically 90% of the projects come from federal dollars. We just recently, and probably in the last 4 years, replaced both runways, both the short and long, and with really good success. The aerial that you're looking at now, when we took it, you can actually see the section of the long runway that's actually being removed, and that all of those projects had 90% federal cost. And the way we budget airport projects is we kind of rack and stack those projects, give those to the FAA, get their considerations. So in the current year budget, we had those taxiways being a little bit more on the front end instead of the back end. They didn't score very well, so they told us the types of project they're looking to score in the next coming years, which is why you see something like the South Aircraft Apron Rehabilitation would score higher. So then we're shifting our priorities so that we have a better chance of getting federal funding. So this project's in 2023 and 2024 to completely redo that apron, and about $600,000 goes through a federal grant. Moving our way to bridges. So this particular project is for pedestrian trail bridges. The one in particular you're looking at here is at Sunderbrook Park. So in 22, we're going to put about $50,000 to kind of supplement funding in the current year to replace that bridge. And then in 2026, another $100,000 moving forward. Currently the one at Sunderbrook, I know I've gotten a couple questions from aldermen about this one. It's been under design for about 8 months. It has to, because it's on a creek, it has to go through the DNR. It's taken about 8 months to get some approvals from the DNR, so it's moved forward. We got that about 2 weeks ago, so this project will be happening this summer. Next is bridge maintenance. So in fiscal year 22, we have $60,000. I'll take a step backwards, as you can see on the text on the screen. So every 24 months, we conduct an inspection of all bridges, both pedestrian and vehicular. So what you see highlighted on the map is all of our vehicular bridges, and we have those inspected. And then in that inspection report, they provide recommendations for maintenance or deck replacements or full replacements. What you see in that $60,000 in 2022 will go for our next round of inspections and reports. In the 6-year program, we have about $1.3 million set aside for those, typically just maintenance related funding. One of the things I'd like to highlight, and we'll touch on some of the projects, the items in green are the ones that are bridges that are actually specified in the 6-year plan. And in the last few years, we've actually done quite a bit of work, 3 or 4 bridges get my years all mixed up. In 2019, we did 3 or 4 bridge projects. In the previous year, the Kimberly Road Bridge over Duck Creek deck was replaced. This last year, Division Street Bridge over Duck Creek was replaced. And obviously, we're getting ready to do Elm Street this year. So continuing our infrastructure on our bridge system is a priority. Next, try to group all these 3 together. So Eastern Avenue bridges, number A and B is over Goose Creek. Number C is over Duck Creek, and we have those kind of throughout the years. An interesting thing on funding when it comes to particularly the Eastern Avenue Bridge over Duck Creek, which we have in 26 and 27, when you're looking to acquire state or federal funding from bridges, it's a weird, what I like to say, it's an awkward scoring system. You have to be good enough where obviously we feel safe and comfortable with people traveling on it, but it has to score low enough to be available for funding. So the more maintenance you do on your bridges, the higher your score, the less likely you are to get federal funding. I think it's kind of weird, but it's the system that we're currently in. So, but we have, we're projecting that in the future we'll be looking at these bridges. Next is Wisconsin Avenue Bridge over Duck Creek in 2025 and 26. This would be all city funding. This would be replacing the deck at $550,000. And then we have funding in 2027 to leverage over grants that we will be going for the East 13th Street Bridge. So, and then naturally with any of these, as federal or state funds become available, we will certainly pursue them in advance, particularly maybe these funding years, but this is just kind of a placeholder effect so you can see them going forward. If, for instance, and this can be any of our street projects or anything that the federal government comes out or the state comes out with funding, we will go for it and then come back. So, especially if we're successful.
Clay, on that one, since I know we don't have any real money for that 13th bridge right now, and the engineering isn't done, so we know it's going to be a while, can we look at a more permanent, temporary closing of that bridge? So right now it looks pretty bad. It's just snow fencing and barrels, and they've been knocked down, and we can do better than that, especially if it's going to be a few years before it gets done.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I'll also say Nicole's been working with Alderman Dorman. I think they're going to be, in this coming up year, going to have some neighborhood conversations about what do they want this bridge to look like? Is it something that's continue to be vehicular? Do they want it narrow? Do they want a more pedestrian feel? And then that will change the scope of what this project is. Next, we hit to everyone's favorite category of facility maintenance. So at our public works facility, in the next fiscal year, we have about $500,000 to replace another section of the public works roofing system. Specifically, this is over what we call our small bay and our bay that houses our solid waste vehicles. And then in an out year in 2027, $170,000 for window replacement and caulking. Alderman Lee, did you have a question? Oh, okay, perfect. Next, Model Woodman Park facility projects. So every year we have X amount of funding specified in our capital program for projects at Model Woodman Park. $511,000 is what's in there for the next fiscal year. Over the 6-year time period, about $3.4 million, and then a separate project of generator replacement in 2024 at $250,000. So this is one we see every single year. Next is right next door is the River's Edge. One of the projects we have is, that's a new one, is a turf arena remodel. So in 23, $150,000 is to do as a kind of a study and a design over looking at is the turf arena, what we want to look at from a long-term perspective for the facility. And I know that's an initiative that Chad has started on. And then obviously more maintenance related items kind of in the future with a roof replacement over that particular part of the facility in 25 at $350,000 and skate safe flooring at $450,000 in the last fiscal year. Yes, ma'am.
Following the chatter on disc golf Facebook pages, they do a lot of stuff in the winter, interestingly enough. And just a thought, it might be a consideration for turf for a removable disc golf putting area where people can practice their putting in the winter and doing it inside. Just a thought.
Yep.
Another way to bring in some revenue, perhaps.
Yeah, and my conversations with Chad has been, they're just trying to look, is there a better way for us to utilize that facility, moving into the future? Next is a series of projects for our freight house and Union Station. So you can kind of see those as we moving forward. Kind of first one is in the next fiscal year, some HVAC replacement at Union Station, and then some roof replacement and window replacements at Freight House in the following years in 23. for about $125,000 total and some electrical upgrades as well. I will say, I've been asked by several people, in the proposed draft, we had some grant match funding for flood mitigation for Union Station. The reason it was brought out is we think, one, we're going to submit a grant to the state probably in the next month or two for that particular project, and any grant, any match funding that we need to provide, I think we can do that in our current fiscal year. So that is a project that we are moving forward on. It's just not housed within the 2022 CIP. So, yep. Next is Skybridge North Tower repairs. So we have about $350,000 in fiscal year 22. So we have some water issues and some drainage issues on that North Tower, so that we're looking to solve. City Hall facility projects, we've touched on a little bit. In 2022, so the next fiscal year, about $300,000 for some exterior repairs. A lot of that is brick tuck pointing, kind of around our facade. And then if possible, some gutter replacement. I think the gutters on this building are 50, 60 plus years old. And then roof replacement and air handler replacement in the future years. Like I said, Alderman Lee, I'll look into some of those air circulation stuff for you. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
Clay, any chance, and this is just a thought, when you have a moment, the bell in the upstairs, we could get it moved to a place, it's the oldest bell in the city. So first fire station had that bell. Just, I don't want to put you in, like, take a lot of money out of it, but if we could get it somewhere in a museum or somewhere nice where people could see it, that'd be cool. Thanks.
Okay. And then next door, our police station. So every year we do an annual allotment of about $50,000. Across 6 years for pump replacement. So heat pumps, or excuse me, when the police station was built, there's 96 individual heat pumps that help heat that facility. It's getting to the point where they're all, they're getting at the end of their useful life. Instead of doing one large 800,000 plus replacement, we've been replacing them as we go, and this provides a stable funding source. It's been working throughout the years. That's where that over 6-year period, that 300,000 is. And then once again, some maintenance items, some painting and some flooring and some security enhancements tied to the parking deck.
Clay?
Specifically.
JJ over here. Can you remind me, how old are those pumps? I'm just curious because I know that's something that we invested in some, green technology, because that's all geothermal, is it? I was curious how long they lasted.
I'm gonna think, I'm trying to think when the station was built, like 07. Yep. So, I mean, they're probably 1 or 2 years within their useful life since that time. But, that's one of those, they say that's industry standards, but some of them are operating perfectly fine. So that's where we're just kind of going, addressing them as they come. Yep. Yes, ma'am.
Great savings by using geothermal. So replacing the pumps is probably probably paying for itself.
I'm always curious about that.
Cost
so much more in the beginning. It's like replacement windows. So.
Yep. Next is some facilities, some maintenance at our libraries. So, in this slide, I try to encapsulate both Eastern Fairmount and Maine. So, in the upcoming fiscal year, we have about $75,000 for furnishment replacements, both at Fairmount and Eastern, and then another $75,000 in 2023. Then we kind of, as you see, as the 6-year plan progresses, you can just see various replacements of either roofs or carpet replacement throughout each facility. It's kind of, we have normal wear and tear. We get a lot of uses, out of these facilities. Want to make sure that they continue to serve the community. Next is parking ramps. Kind of how Mallory touched base last week, how the parking ramp fund has been a success because we're, getting off that debt service payment. So we're able to allocate some parking ramp funds to start addressing some of these concerns. The first of which is Redstone exterior repairs. I believe my memory is correct. I think the Southwest Tower has some water issues as you go through it. So that'll be the first thing we look to address. We're currently doing a concrete study throughout each of the ramps just to see from a maintenance perspective what's the best way for us to use our funds. And then you can kind of see as it kind of goes throughout those 6 years, in particular, which projects they're scheduled. I will say in the last couple years, we've done quite a bit of work updating the lighting in some of our ramps, and you'll probably in the next council cycle or two see a contract. We bought some cameras to install in those ramps, and the installation of those will be coming before you probably fairly soon. But that's out of current year funding. Next is we have our fire station facilities. Once again, roof replacements, HVAC replacements. One in particular I'll draw your attention to, that's not necessarily facility, but I just wanted to throw it in there, is the life pack and Lucas replacement for our fire station, our fire personnel. It's about $425,000. It's a pretty large investment, but it's one that will be coming close in 2023. And talking fire facilities, now we're going to start looking at fire
Clay,
station.
you have a couple questions.
Oh, I'm
Ms.
sorry.
Lee?
On the fireboat house protection, right now it's being protected by moving it back and forth, if I understand, to protect it from ice. I'm wondering if this perhaps, if we were to move it up and actually build the protection it needs now so it doesn't have to be moved back and forth, is there a potential for damage by the moving itself that could be avoided if we were just do the protection now? Does that make sense?
Chief, I'll take this one unless you want to chime in. We've been moving it since we got it without concern, both to another location in Davenport, and we had originally stored it in a partnership with Rock Island. I think, and again, I won't directly speak for the chief, but I will take an educated guess on this. If you asked him what his priorities are in the grander scheme of things, that's not going to be one that he would want moved up.
Okay.
Okay. Good segue about priorities. So Fire Station 3 relocation, I know a couple years ago we had a public safety study performed by a third party. One of their recommendations, several of their recommendations we've moved forward with fairly quickly, and then some of the longer term ones we've always had like in the back of our mind. This is one in particular. So in the last calendar year, we purchased property, is indicated in red, so north of Kimberly, but it's just north of East 42nd Street, right situated within Welcome Way and Brady Street. That already has lighted intersections. I'll say in working with the Iowa DOT, they typically don't like adding lighted intersections onto state highways, so having that stuff already there is fantastic and great. But you can kind of see it would, having this facility and moving Station 3 from its current location, which here is on West 35th, and getting it north of Kimberly would greatly increase response times to areas of our city that, as we've grown throughout the decades, it would be really helpful from the response perspective.
And I'll just add, the wear and tear on where it is on 35th has been an issue for 20-some years. Yep. It just beats the living heck out of it. And then both in the Blue Ribbon Commission that we had a couple years ago and the outside study we commissioned, this was one of the consistent things that came up. Thank you.
So in 22, we have $400,000 to start the design process. In 2024 is where you see the large section of money. I've been asked the question of, well, why is it a year out? This way we can have design funding move forward. You have a better idea of cost, so when then you budget it, you have a good estimate on hand rather than just placing money, a bucket of money in there to work off of. So moving forward with that
Clay,
particular project.
In the short term, like the spring, can we clean up that site and maybe put a sign saying it's coming? We talk about revitalizing that part of the town, and this lot right now is kind of an eyesore on the city, so maybe mow it, landscape a little bit, and get a pretty sign.
What's that guy and girls sign thing?
Oh, Brad and Gia.
Brad and Gia, there you go.
Yep.
Mr. Condon has a question.
I just want to bring a concept back up, and I know we've talked about this in passing, but for whatever reason, people like fire stations and fire trucks. So that's actually an asset up there that as we look to put other improvements on, I'd like an opportunity to build on it. I know an event space was considered, and my personal idea has been some sort of an indoor playground space. If we're gonna position that someplace, it's a great opportunity to brand it. So, thank you.
Thinking exactly as our staff has been thinking.
So JJ, I would say the site's not big enough to accommodate a playground, just from a parking standpoint. And I would think fire, when they roll out those rigs, don't want that conflict. But we have talked about two specific add-ons, or, you know, if you think about the scope, that it is the training station, and so that we build it out to be a great training station. But that a community room, so think of ward meetings, neighborhood meetings, those kinds of things. We've even talked about, Chad, about how you program it, similar to some of the meeting rooms at the libraries, but to make sure we don't have space conflicts, because parking is usually pretty tight in those locations. And then we've actually talked to both chiefs about having not what I would call a formal substation, but to have a place where DPD can stop in and write reports, or, you know, just have a safe spot to take a break, that kind of stuff. So we're looking at a multi-departmental facility as we build this one out.
And I guess what I'm saying is, rather than just being geographically adjacent to it, actually brand it to show off PD and fire, so that people have some pride in what they do.
Next, looking at our compost facility. So we have a number, once again, just trying to group all these together. So the composting hall trench replacement, so there's about 95, 96 individual trenches that's in that composting hall. Over time, they need to be replaced, and we can do those over as staff. And when they have issues, this would look at full-scale replacement of those. These are out in 25 and 26, and then the same with some additional projects out in that year 5 and 6 of the plan. Next one is a new project, so the auxiliary services site. So this would be purchasing, I know Corey has talked on this a couple of times in the last year. So the purchase of property and a facility to serve, you know, multiple city departments. You know, vehicle storage is one of them. Evidence of storage is something that we've talked about kind of moving forward, is putting a particular site. I don't have anything mapped because we're still looking at locations, but this provides $750,000 in the next fiscal year to go towards that purchase. Okay.
One of the things we've talked about, and this is going to come as from out of left field, I guess, but one of the things we've talked about was perhaps the need for better storage of vehicles that are towed, so they're not at the edge of the city. And if we could find some private entity to run a facility that was closer, you know, because most of the things that are towed are more downtown. This is an issue that I've discussed for a long time with staff. There's not a good answer because we don't have somebody operate it, but if, in the idea of doing this, if a piece of that land could be, you know, leased to a company that, you know, a private company that does, because obviously we're not going to be in the towing business, that would handle that, that might help facilitate, because I'm assuming this would be in a place that would be appropriate for storing vehicles, not in the middle of the neighborhood or whatever. So just something to think about, and maybe that would give us the edge of, and we could find a good company to run it in a way that is good and really is located where the need is. That's just a thought.
So the stage we're at on this project is we've kind of scoped out what our facility needs are. You know, obviously you need roll-up doors, and for the PD evidence side, we need to secure it and all those kinds of things. You can imagine we can't find the perfect facility in the city right now, so we're working through some of that in terms of what the scope is, because there are some more immediate needs for fire and police storage that we need to resolve. But we'll keep, kind of like as we evolve the city and our service delivery, we'll keep that business line in mind too.
Next is just a roll-up of all of our fleet purchases across the 6 years. So in 2022, a little over $3 million. You can kind of see what those projects are. So solid waste program, so $930,000. Our fire apparatus is $1 million. Public safety vehicle program at $400,000. That CCTV crawler camera system I mentioned at the very beginning, about $300,000. I will also say that this utilizing capital funding, appropriate capital funding, whether it's local sales tax or equipment bonds, It helps augment the vehicle replacement program that's built within the operating budget so that we can try to continue to have a good series of replacements for typically our more large-scale purchases. For instance, $1 million is not something we have in the operating budget for fire apparatus, so that's why we take it out of the capital program. So over the 6 years, about $23 million. Yes, ma'am.
First, if I understand right, the hazardous material response vehicle isn't being funded at all, but that's a regional, we're one of 3 in the state that is trained for regional response for hazmat. Do we need that vehicle now since we're regional, and can we get support from some of the other municipalities to help pay for that?
So we do have one now that is operational. We tried in the last calendar year to go for a federal grant. We thought we had a good application in. It really turned out that in the end, and we had reached out to a lot of the surrounding communities for letters of support. They were all happy to do so. Once again, like this vehicle, and I think because Davenport Fire is one of 3 in the state that's weapons of mass destruction. So we thought we had a really good chance. However, in talking, we were not successful, obviously. And then looking forward, it turns out the federal agency that was overseeing this program, that just wasn't the type of vehicle they were looking to fund. So it wasn't anything we can do better or wrong. It's just, that's just not what their priority was from a federal perspective. That program has now opened itself back up just recently. We're re-examining that, seeing if that's still the case, we're gonna go for something else. So we're always keeping to try to see how we can leverage our funding for that, but it's not something that we're gonna stop doing, is looking for grants for that one.
Because I open up.
Yep.
With this administration. Bus fleet, you folks tried for an electric grant for electric buses, which was excellent. You didn't get it, but hopefully we'll have another chance at something like that.
That's what's in, you see that 3.8 million in 2023. A substantial part of that, that funding source is a federal grant that we're going to be going for again.
And then just one more, thank you. The public safety vehicle program, as it says, this is supplementary to the squad cars in the operational budget. But I would still like to recommend that we look into the hybrid squad cars that at a minimum Ford puts out. They are powered correctly, they're already built for police use. They're armored both underneath and on the sides. They've got all the like I said, they've got the power, they've got the, you don't have to idle them in order to keep the electronics running like you do now. So I would just like to continue to encourage, and maybe it might even be worth going to Chicago and testing some of them out. Bringing some of your folks and see what they think.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I can't recall if it was during the last budget talks or more or less it was probably during a city hall meeting, but this conversation came up and I'd like to know, is there any follow-up to it? It revolves around purchases of vehicles, and more particularly, I'm quite sure it was a city council meeting. Instead of going out to a faraway city, is there any more talk or discussion about buying a fleet or a set of vehicles locally to buy stuff that's always, or a manufacturer or a store or dealership that's in the Quad Cities?
So part of that's part of our purchasing policy, that through efficiency, both cost and kind of process, we buy off the state bid list most of the time. Sometimes it's local, sometimes it's not. In the case of in the past few years, we did have an agreement to buy local. They could not deliver. We waited 18 months to find out they could not deliver, and then we had to pivot to another dealer. So at some point, it's a little bit of a council policy decision if you want to restrict that, but we've not always had great luck with some of that in the past.
If I heard you correctly, and I knew you was going to say it was going to be a policy decision, so does this need to be a workshop that leads to some type of ordinance, or is there some that staff proposed to us that we can go ahead and do something expeditiously? Because I do think that conversations have been had already, because it was a city council meeting. And if I remember correctly as well, you know, leading that city council meeting, I could have swore that something should have came up that we would put something in place to look into buying locally than going to some outskirts of some faraway city in Iowa.
So we can look at doing that, but it's the bids thing that we're restricted by. So we could say we have to go local, but the state will tell us we have to use their bidding. You guys could decide to do that.
Okay. So moving on, the urban revitalization program entering into the general government category. So in 2022, funding in a little over $1 million. Across the full 6 years is about 6.5 million. This is the one that directly funds our DREAM program. On the map, you can see, so the dots are the projects that were selected in 2019. The orange ones were the ones that are selected in the previous calendar year. So you can see, I think this has been a really successful program, so this continues to fund that.
Clay, with that being said, and this is probably more Corey or Bruce, with this program, how do we define success? Or now that we're on this be funding for year 4 of it, I believe, what is the success of it? How do we know that it's successful, or what's that measuring?
So you've funded 2 years. We're only 1 year into actual construction and completion. So for us building the metrics, we're a little early in that. I would say anecdotally, the fact that all of the feedback we've gotten from those who are selected and their neighbors and kind of the rolling out of this, that it's not just one house on the street that ends up being improved. I think Alderman Dunn's probably got the best example from year 1. Right now, it's in my opinion, too early to say what that margin should be, but the fact that we are supporting reinvestment in our heritage neighborhoods and that is having a visible and both technical and anecdotal improvement, I don't have anything beyond that to add, but I think Alderman Dunn has the best example.
Other question kind of relating that too is, if you look at the map here, there's a clear, of the DREAM area, there's a clear chunk of missing projects. And that's also a chunk of 3rd Ward, 5th Ward, where we need a lot of investment. How do we target that and make sure, once again, it's where we truly need it?
Alderman Dunn.
I can argue that it's probably needed everywhere. But go back to an example. There's one house that I know we did. They put new windows, new siding, and the contractor couldn't get out of that neighborhood because there's like 6 other houses that wanted their stuff done while he was there. So you started with 1 and ended up having 7 done in about a 2-block area. So I think it's working out very well.
Alderman Condon.
Corey, what you said about it still being early is very accurate, but as we continue to fund this program, one of the biggest measuring sticks that I think we can use is how it's actually affected the marketplace. And I was hoping that we could get some data building, maybe using, I think it's gonna take an appraiser, so whether the city assessor would be willing to take on a project, and I know they view appraisals through a slightly different prism than a marketplace appraiser, but yeah, we just gotta get some measurables there about what it's doing to the sales in the surrounding neighborhoods so that we know if we're having an impact. My fear is that it's actually too big of a geographical area. I want to be equitable and I want to affect as much of the city as I can, but to get that snowball of momentum building, you have to build on past successes in a geographical area.
Alderman McGinnis.
Thank you, Your Honor. Yeah, just to add to Alderman Dorman's question, when I look at this area, I see the center part of it is, of course, where Palmer is, where there's a significant section of that there are less houses there. But The other thing I would point out is, what just jumps out at me is, because I look at census tracts all the time, this is the highest, especially in Census Tract 106, it's the highest level of rental in our city, and so you have less concentrated homeowners that might be applying. I know people within that area who have applied in Third Ward, and, you know, I hear from people that don't get it, but not a lot, you know, and, you know, I think they understand. I don't hear as much from people who do. I would like to see, there was a concern the first year. I know there were some applications within the neighborhood I live in, which was historic, and there was a sense of, well, it's not enough money to make a difference. That's, I hope we don't, I think we've gotten past that, because, you know, we don't require a match in this, but if somebody's doing a bigger project and this helps, it does help everybody. So, and you do have a number of historic districts in this section as well, but I don't think that's what's impacting it. Perhaps what you and I can do, Alderman Dorman, I might use some of my Alderman funds next year to send a letter to all homeowners in Third Ward saying, hey, this is coming, and you may be able to, you know, do that also with maybe some of your funding, just to say, hey, just know that this is here. So, but it's you got a lot of commercial down the middle of that as well. So in any case, it's a great program, and I'm thrilled that we have it, and you know, hopefully we can, you know, add more, we can, you know, keep moving this along and doing even more. Thank you.
Alderman Ambrose.
Thanks, Your Honor. You know, I gotta thank Alderman Grip. A couple years ago, you gave us all a book about smart cities and the huge economic impact to older neighborhoods when the city makes a commitment to them. You know, you get your greatest economic bang for your buck in these older neighborhoods. And just like Alderman Dunn said, you know, you see it spill out as we make these commitments. You know, the neighborhoods become more stable, more safe, and robust. You know, I see more and more kids in some of our core neighborhoods walking to school. So, you know, maybe staff sometimes gets a little tired of listening to me gripe about the neighborhoods south of Locust and our core neighborhoods, but Alderman Grip, smart cities, and the impact on older neighborhoods, it's tremendous, and I'm fortunate. The city's fortunate that we're making a commitment. You know, in the past, the city's made many commitments to our older neighborhoods. A lot of them, you know, went to the wayside, so. But I would ask anybody, you know, take a look at that book that Alderman Grip gave you. You know, you should refresh your memories before you get into these budget studies about how simple it is to have a tremendous impact on older neighborhoods and the impact of that investment.
Okay, anybody else? No, carry on.
The next is our demolition program. So 200,000 in fiscal year 2022, about 1.1 million over the 6-year program. Once again, the items, the dots in blue are what's been done since 2015. The ones in orange are the ones that I believe that you've already approved a contract for that'll be done this upcoming year. And then Rich, so Rich and his team are the ones who oversee this program, and I think he's going to let a couple more as well. So you'll see a couple more orange dots really appear kind of in the spring.
Clay, in addition to this demolition program, can we work towards next year's capital improvement program to have the same map but with abandoned homes, where we could then maybe then add capital and funding and other ideas where we can hopefully address the abandoned homes before they end up on this list, in order to kind of tackle that issue with our neighborhoods?
Will do. Okay. Next is the Community Improvement Support Program. So to piggyback off what Alderwoman McGinnis said, this is the allocation, the annual allocation for the City Council and Mayor. So 55,000 in the upcoming fiscal year and about 330,000 over time. over 6 years, and then you can see kind of from a just pure location perspective where some of those funds have been spent. Next, this is one of my favorite. So Emerald Ash Borer Program. So ever since I've been here at the city, so it's going on 7.5 years, we've been talking about the emerald ash borer bug that's invading. I think quite around 2013, we weren't quite sure it was here, but I think we had evidence of it in about 2014 or 15. So we had about anywhere between 3,400 or 3,600 ash trees that are located specifically within the public right-of-way or public property. And so we have methodically, over time, continued to address those and take those down before they become public risk. So the items, or the dots you see in blue, are the ones that we have removed since about 2013 time period. And then the ones in orange are the ones that remain. I would say, in talking with our city arborist about a week ago, we only have about 600 left that's in the right-of-way. The rest is on public property and ones that they feel don't necessarily have a public health risk, but ones that we will be addressing. So about $100,000 in 2022 and about $350,000 throughout the 6 year.
Claire, you have a bunch. I'll try and catch them in order here. Alderwoman McGinnis on the ash.
Thank you. Yeah, just our arborist, and of course, our city arborist is really interested in trees, so he has a natural bias for that, which is great. That's what his job. But I did ask him to come and speak to our board meeting this year, and one of the issues, it was after the derecho and emerald ash, and he is, there is a concern about our canopy, our green canopy. There's been loss from the derecho, from emerald ash, but also from drought and weather conditions, extreme cold, extreme drought. And so this is something, maybe there will be grants, maybe there will be a way to look for this, but replenishment, our canopy has been hurt by all of these events and weather changes and everything else. So, this is really important, to the lungs of our city, and I hope we can, I know this isn't that, but I hope that we can continue to look for, programs that perhaps would, help us replenish this more quickly. Thank you.
All right, Alderman Grip.
Yeah, I echo that. One of the best parts about a mature city is the mature urban canopy. So the biggest area of concern, and I think we talked a little bit about this last year, is Emise Park, and then also it looks like Duck Creek Park as well. Mm-hmm. Is there a specific plan on how to address Emise Park as far as replanting those trees?
There are some methods in which you can treat individual trees instead of just plain removal. The ones at Emise and Duck Creek are ones that we are attempting to treat because they are some of the older, more historic ones that kind of blend in with the park and blend in with the golf course. So we are trying some methods to preserve those trees. But yeah, we will have a systematic plan if for ones that we have to remove to go after those, because that is a substantial number. And I will also point out, we do have a program, it's not in the presentation, but it's a reforestation that we provide our forestry division so he can continue to buy trees and replenish those. I will say when we remove something, we always put something back. It's typically our procedure. But what we also are trying to do is think long-term. And as you can see, I think there was one, I think he was telling me in the 90s, I think that happened around here where we had a pretty prevalent species that had a bug or something come through and wipe it out. So what we're trying to do is provide diversity in our urban canopy. So if something like this happens again, it doesn't create widespread, I will just say, destruction of an urban canopy because we're so heavily reliant on one species of trees.
Right.
Sorry.
So with all of the ash trees that need to be dealt with at Emise Park, there's not a plan that we're going to go through and cut all of those trees down and then go years without having that nice canopy that the park has. There's a plan in place to deal with the ones that need to be dealt with today, to treat the ones we can and start replanting so we maintain that canopy.
Yep.
Good, thank you.
Alderman Dorman.
Yeah, and Clay, that was kind of my question there that Alderman Grip and Alderman McGinnis had, but just with the tree reforestry program, I see here it goes 50-50 and then 100,000 in 2024. And I would think post derecho, it would almost be like 200,000, then 50-50. Why is there not that maybe like snapback or rebound from the hard hits we took last summer?
Part of it is, so John and his team are going to be dealing with derecho-related consequences of everything in our city parks. You know, we made sure everything from a public safety perspective, or public health and safety perspective, was taken care of. But there is quite a lot on public property that still needs to be handled. So he's still dealing kind of with the aftermath of that. And that will take a little bit of time as we move forward. So probably one of the things we look at next year in the next budget is, do we do something like that? And we also want to make sure if we provide someone the funding that they have the capacity in which to do those things. I mean, if they're focused on, you know, taking down damaged trees, then they can't spend those funds in a timely manner. We want to make sure that we can align those things correctly. So you'll probably see something differently on the next year budget as we kind of move forward. And we always try to play off the reforestation and the Emerald Ash Borer program together. So I was telling John, if he needs to replace, you know, sometimes he uses the ash borer program to replace the tree that he takes down. Sometimes, you know, we use them interchangeably as we go forward. So at some point, we'll stop with the emerald ash and it'll flip back to reforestation.
Thanks, Doug.
All right, last one on this, Alderwoman Lee.
I just want, anyone who's planted one tree knows how much time it takes to make it live for the first couple of years. And there's so many trees, and our arborist group is pretty small, right? Yeah. So it's a lot of work to create a forest. And anecdotally, I have a mature ash tree in my yard that I have been treating with the injections, not me, but I've been hiring, for about 6 years. And as everybody else's trees around me have been dying, mine is growing and healthy. So those treatments do work, but they're not as big as the trees in Emais.
Yep.
It's not as big.
All right, moving on.
Next is our downtown streetscaping program. So in fiscal year 2022, $350,000 from the city. That will then be leveraged with $75,000 private contribution. That's the downtown partnership in the next fiscal year, and then over time about $1.7 million. Specifically, for next year, but for the current construction season or current calendar year, our plan is to look at 2nd Street. So this area in orange here, that's where the FY22 money will go forward. We operate off of a council agreement and policy with the downtown partnership. There's a split funding mechanism there. So they'll pay for X amount of materials, we pay for something, and then the property owners also have a share in that cost. I don't show the property owner perspective because that's done through an assessment process. So the city cost is our cost plus theirs because we pay the upfront. So, and I'll also make mention to the partnership. They've been really great to work with. They've also, in addition to what their cost is, they pay for design. So they upfront all that design, but then give us as the city the final say in all the engineering matters. So they leave those up to us, but it's been a really good partnership. Next is our library materials program. So every year we fund the materials for Amy and her group at about $415,000, and that's what is planned for in the 22 budget. And then that's spread throughout all our 3 libraries. That's physical materials and digital materials. Next is park development programs. So this has been one of our more successful park programs. So in $350,000 in the next fiscal year, $2 million over a 6-year time period. You can see on the map, items in blue is what's been funded over the years. Items in orange are what's in the current fiscal year. What we do is Chad and his team go before the Park Advisory Board, get their recommendations, and then bring that separately to the City Council, who then you all get to decide where some of those funding or some of those projects are dispensed. So. Next is a new program that's a part of the 22 budget. So it's $170,000 for playground replacement. Typically, playgrounds come out of that park development fund. It's been successful. We typically do 2 a year. The idea of separating this out and providing a specific funding source, I know Alderman Grip sometimes makes mention of it, is if we want to fund the replacement of 2 standard playgrounds, this is what gets it. But also you have the option of funding a specialty playground, a larger set that's more unique to a particular portion of town. This provides you a funding mechanism for that. So, and then the map just shows you kind of where our playgrounds are across this city system. Yes, ma'am.
Quick question. In the draft CIP for this, it was 170,000 every year, and now it's every other year. Could you explain?
Yes, so part of it as a new, we feel like this will be a popular program. Part of it is to see how it was the council's reaction and how it goes. I mean, that certainly could go into the next 2023 budget. It might turn into an annual year program. It's kind of, we want it as a first year thing. We wanted to see the success of it before kind of looking at it. But if that's the council's direction, that's certainly something that staff will do.
Alderman Grip.
Yeah, so thank you for looking at this, and I do want to give some positive feedback to Chad Dyson that the playgrounds that we have put in recently have been of excellent quality, really good. I'm happy with the process that we're going through to put those in, and I also appreciate this because one thing I've been pushing for is some of the what I call our signature parks in the city. I believe need a little bit higher finish of playground in them that will actually draw people from outside of the neighborhoods to them, as opposed to a neighborhood park, which is really there for people who live in the neighborhood, who walk there. There's no bathrooms in those neighborhood parks. So if this gives an opportunity to continue to do the good work we're doing in neighborhood parks, which I agree has gotten better in the last 5 years, but then also to provide a little higher level finish, I think it's an excellent idea. Thank you.
Okay.
Next is Duck Creek Park improvement. So in 2022, $50,000, in 23 and 24, $500,000. So this has a number of components. So it's installing a regional dog park on the east side of town, adding some pickleball courts and an obstacle style play course, along with some repairs to the Duck Creek shelter.
Alderman Job.
Clay just apologized. I do want to say thanks to fellow council members who responded to some of my reaching out, trying to get some of this moving along. There has been some significant requests from people on the east side of Davenport looking for upgrades within this park, and it's going to come as a welcome change over there. So also thanks to Parks Director Dyson for helping me work through some different things, and so appreciative of all this, and look forward to see some of these changes.
Alderman Grip.
Yeah, I want to echo those sentiments from Alderman Jobjan. It's really cool when we get ideas from citizens who we have existing park infrastructure. Here's some ways that we could make this park better. Here's how we're looking to use it. And then we've got a parks director and a ward alderman who work really hard to see which of those ideas we can actually implement. And then within a few months, having that put into the budget and looking at 23, 24. This is very exciting for Duck Creek Park and the folks on the east side of town.
Thank you. Yep, I agree. Parks improvement really matters when you have your, touch on the neighborhood. So, yep. Oh, Alderman Lee, sorry.
Just a quick point. Last fall, my 8th Ward representative on the park board and I went and looked at every park in the 8th Ward and came up with ideas for every park. He presented it to the park board shortly after we wrote the report, and we're now using that as a basis for putting in projects for this. So, so we've got it in context. It's working very well. Thank you.
Next is improvements to our golf courses. So in 2023, $225,000. This looks at kind of extension of the Duck Creek Trail or Duck Creek cart path. Swimming pool improvements. So in 2025, continue to make upgrades at all 3 of our municipal-owned pools. Park amenity ADA. Yes, ma'am.
Before we leave parks, I think. We had one for the Leclerc Park bandshell upgrades, $30,000 in 2026. Since outdoor recreation and concerts are going to be so important, could we just at least get the bandshell painted and worry about the seats later?
I will look into that.
Thank you.
Clay, Corey, can you remind me, are we in the midst of a parks master plan study, or has that happened, or what?
That's correct. I think Chad's working on several different plans. He's part of the flood plan team. There's a parks master plan. And then there was the River West plan. So there are multiple things going underway. that I think it's important to wrap some of those up before we dig too far into things.
So potentially, all these park conversations we've had, we could see more projects or more unique or more specific kind of on the outcome of what that study is.
I think you're always going to have people who want more. You have funding constraints and priorities.
That's exactly right. And we did a humongous band shell project recently. Alderman Dunn.
Thank you, Your Honor. As the alderman that has probably most of the park space in the city of Davenport, I only have one request, and that is, can we fix the road at Credit Island as soon as possible?
Yep. Good deal. Moving on.
So our Park Amenity ADA Access Program, some funding to augment our current year funds. So $75,000 in the next fiscal year, $400,000 over 6 years. Our next Ridgeview Park is what we did last calendar year. Emice Park is what we're going to be doing in the current calendar year. So next is Creating Connections Program. This has two components, but we'll go over the funding first. So about $625,000 in the next fiscal year, $2.8 million over the 6-year program. The two components is a 50-50 cost share program is one of those. It's highly successful, as you can see what's been the kind of work we've done across the city. We always make sure that when people try and call in, we get to them within the year, if not the next year, for fixing their sidewalks. Another one, and it's very recently, the city council tasked staff to start installing sidewalks where there were missing links, so we complete our sidewalk system. So we've started doing that. The full cost of putting that in is on the property owner, and so we order the sidewalk in. They have the option of putting it in themselves, or the city can do it for them, and then we assess them the cost. So this also provides money for that. Some of the areas in orange is what we are looking to do in the next calendar year. So next is Civil Access Program. So this is our ADA ramp repairs. So $500,000 to continue our assessment in the next fiscal year. You're probably in the next council cycle or two, you'll actually see a fairly large $200,000 to $250,000 contract come up for you as a public hearing. So continue to making those progress throughout the city.
Well, thank you, Clay, for doing a couple years ago. We made this a priority, and boy, we see this happening all the time. So good job.
Yep. So let's see, and then we'll move forward. So then the West Loop Phase 1. So this is, we were successful in getting a grant. It's in fiscal year 2023. It's about $500,000 grant for about a $700,000 project. This would be the first phase of taking the western terminus of Duck Creek Trail, or excuse me, multi-use recreational path, and bringing it down to Locust all the way to Wisconsin. The overall goal that we're looking to accomplish is connecting it to Sunderbrook and then connecting it to the Riverfront Trail. This is the first step in that process. Next is then our, recreational trail replacement or reconstruction program. So you can kind of see highlighted what our system looks like. What's in green is what we've done over the past few years, heavily on Duck Creek. It was much needed, and I think, I'm going the wrong way. But as we move forward, so $200,000 in the next fiscal year. We typically do this on an every other year basis. Our next targeted area is the issue at Sunderbrook Park, kind of going up that hill. So we're going to address that in the current calendar year.
Clay, on this one, if you were to take those blue lines and extend them out over to our friends in Bettendorf, we would come to a point where that river trail and our Duck Creek Trail connect. Mm-hmm. And they currently cannot connect because our friends in Riverdale refuse to open up their bridge. Can we make it a priority to have these discussions with them that missing piece that is out of our control is hindering one of our main assets that we have of a city, of our two recreational paths, and hopefully work with them in order to find a way to get that reopened and get these two links connected back together from a regional approach?
I'll take a piece, and Ms. Spiegel might take it. Yes, those discussions happen. Yes, they know our position. Yes, I don't know this is solvable because that is a significant issue there.
Remember, too, we treat their sewer wastewater, so.
Oh, yeah, okay, we're not going to use that.
I'm just saying, it's an important.
No disrespect, but we're not using that as a.
It's an extremely important connection.
And most of them believe that. Okay, yeah, this is way outside our purview here, folks, so.
Yeah,
Ms. Spiegel?
I was just going to say, Decker and Mayor Gallagher are working very closely with them. We have a legal obligation to our water pollution control plant, so we don't get to use that carrot. But at the end of the day, this is a local control issue for that community too, and we need to be a good partner from that standpoint as well.
Go ahead, Grip.
Moving on, public and
Alderman Grip has one more.
I'm sorry.
All right, well, I would just reiterate the importance of that connection and leave it at that. But from a regional standpoint, before we move on from the recreational trails, there was a page about the north-south Duck Creek towards Eldridge. Are you presenting on this in your slide deck?
I do not have it in the slide.
Okay, so the thing I would say is, I was glad to see it in our budget packet, and I think it is time that regionally we start pushing for this and really going after the funding to get it done. And if you look at the Davenport Go, we're very good east to west from connectivity standpoint. That north to south piece is where we struggle, and this is the piece that get outside of bike lanes and street infrastructure. If you're looking at path infrastructure, that's probably the biggest thing we could do from a regional perspective. And I'd really like the council to understand that, and I'd like our staff to be pushing towards finding the funding sources for it. Thank you.
Cool. Carry on. Yep.
Public and traffic safety camera program, so 100,000 in the upcoming fiscal year, 600,000 over the 6-year. In talking with Corey Smith earlier today, the LPR cameras that you approved late last year look to be starting to be implemented I think at the tail end of February. So right there at the Brady and Harrison Locust Street intersections.
Clay, with this one, is this funding specifically for new or maintenance of the ones we currently have?
It's a general bucket that allows us to do, kind of what our chief thinks is the best thing that we need to do. Typically, new is what we've done in the past.
I've heard, I don't know if it's true or not, that some of the ones we currently have aren't working or aren't operable. Is that the case? Or?
Some of the ones you can see on this map were part of pilot programs. The beauty, if you want to call it that, of pilot programs is you test things out. You make to see what works and what doesn't work. In the end, what we have figured out, cell-based services and sometimes work. I'll use an example at 3rd and Harrison. It's a cell-based service. Camera works perfectly fine. Looks like you're watching HD quality on your TV. You could put that in another section of town where, because of the urban tree canopy or a number of other variables, whether or not they get good connectivity or for their bandwidth, it may not work as well. So there aren't ones, excuse me, to my knowledge, that are not working. Some of them have a little bit of trouble, and it's because of the bandwidth issue that we utilize. And here comes our
Corey Smith, IT Director. We do have connectivity issues at some of these locations. We have entered an agreement with MetroNet to repair some of those, including Washington Street. So those issues that we had for connectivity, I expect those to go away this year.
Thank you.
Cool. Carry on. Oh, did you want, Alderman Gish, you want to say something?
Yes, please. About the cameras, so you're showing us the ones that were in and the ones that are in this year's budget. So do you have, when will you be deciding, assuming this budget is approved, where your additional ones are going to be? Because this is current year's 2021 approved, and so this is the budget for 2022. So when would you make that decision with the conversation?
We'll evaluate after these are in place. The ones that we're doing now are actually, we're replacing 2 of the squad cars, LPR systems, because they were not as functional, with a new system. And then the ones that are currently being installed are the 2 new locations. One is at Centennial Bridge. The other one is at Harrison and Locust. We'll make an assessment after that to decide what the best next location is or adjustment is.
Carry on.
Next, we have our River Center and Adler facility projects. So in the upcoming fiscal year, 200,000 towards our renovation. Some of our renovation projects we've had kind of a little bit somewhat put on hold with everything that's going on the last year. However, it on some of our more aesthetic stuff, Rick Palmer and his group will meet with them and kind of figure out our pathway forward. Our roof project, which was scheduled for last year, moved forward, and our door replacement projects moved forward as well. So even though we haven't had a lot of activities going on there, we're continuing to update that facility. Okay. Next is the Riverfront Flood Resiliency Program.
Mike,
I'm sorry.
Clay, when you have that discussion, why don't you bring in our Parks Director, because the River Center is so underutilized. You know, the possibility of running different parks programs out of that area. In the past, that had been discussed about setting it up for indoor soccer, but with pickleball and all these other great activities, you know, we want to try to get as much utilization of that facility as we can, and I think we can do much better. I think our Parks Department should be involved with that discussion. Thanks.
Just curious, how much you got, this next subject might cause a lot of discussion. I don't know. You take a break? Anybody give a break? All right, 10 minutes. 2 minutes, 2 minutes.
You know what he's doing?
Huh?
Do you know what he's doing?
Yeah. Go listen, do that, then this is our city though.
Yeah, this is the most, if you don't want to be a part of the most important input you have within a city.
There is no more important input than that, other than maybe the bond thing, but the bond, we don't have a lot of input in, we just cheer, right? No, this is it, and he's choosing to do the state thing. Each to their own, right?
Right, which he has no input over.
No, he has no input. He thinks he does, but.
I gave,
Like
I
Dale,
gave Robbie.
and a couple other people were talking to me this last week, and like, they keep asking me, and I don't know what to do with it. I mean, I'm not doing it. He won't call his concession. Dale asked me to today, and a couple people called me because I was the previous seven. They're like, so give me some more call. I'll try and take it on, then I'll let him know, but I let him know when I do something. He never responds to me, so I said, all you can do is keep asking. And then remember that sometimes. That's your bit, it's kind of like, I can't solve that problem for you.
I talked with Robbie this week. I gave him an earful about Robbie Smith.
Yeah.
Gave him an earful about what the governor's proposing to do with public education. He basically said,
That's what they're doing.
he goes, what did he said they need 20, 26 or something, and they got 30. He goes, even if I don't vote for it, he says, she asked for it, she's gonna get it.
Well, I talked to her Wednesday.
And it's
And
all
all I try to do is patience. Don't do this whole massive charter school, take money from public school, on and on and on and on. Nope, this is what people want. And I said, Governor, I think you know I'm a teacher, and I get you want to have choice, but we already don't, in my opinion, don't fund the public schools enough. What you're gonna do is take money from it, we're gonna create such a conflict. And she goes, well, it'll work out. I'm like, okay. She was nice enough to talk to me, but.
Yeah, and he pretty much said this is her beef with one school.
No, that's where it is, because they went up full online, she didn't want them to. Yep. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's make our way back. All right, Clay, carry on.
So our next group of projects are Riverfront. The first project is the Flood Resiliency Program. So as everyone knows, we're kind of working our way through that. This in particular provides a funding source to start implementing those recommendations. The idea being, so in 2022, there's $850,000 over 6 years, about 5.8. So by putting a bucket of money in there, in the fall, you'll be getting those recommendations. You guys will help decide the priorities. This provides you a funding source very quickly to be able to decide to do something if you choose to do so.
Yeah, and I'll just add, one of the humongous things people asked us to do was get a outside firm to help us with the flood study and then implement projects in phases and areas, because as we all know, the river's different depending on when you're on the west, middle, or east, and you guys are starting to already foresee and move forward, and then the study will help us fine tune it. This is a wonderful thing, and we committed to our citizens because they wanted us to do something that not only are we doing it with a study, we're doing it with action. So I got a lot of people who want to talk here. Let's see, Alderman Dorman.
Thanks, Mayor. And this might not be the right time or place for this question, so maybe it's next Tuesday, but can we get an update, or where are we at in that timeline of this study? It's been, probably 6 months now since they started. Are we at an update point or close to one?
So what I would ask for the efficiency of this meeting, because we have a long way to go in this presentation, is we can put that stuff in the parking lot and add it to Tuesday update stuff.
I'd appreciate it on Tuesday.
Thank you. If that takes away all the questions, I'm waiting. Nope, Alderman Good.
I'll be brief. I get a lot of questions about, where are you at with building the flood wall is typically how the question goes. And I'd like to remind people that this is a very long process. Cedar Rapids had their major flood in 2008. They began building out their flood protection system in 2018. It took a decade to do the study, find the money, and implement it. This is not you come up with the plan and you execute it in a few months type of deal, but this is the first step in the right direction of saying we're going to have a comprehensive flood plan. It's going to encompass our entire riverfront in different spreads, and we're committing money to it now, understanding that other government entities are also going to have to commit to it. Thank you.
Great way to say it. Thank you. Carry on. Next slide.
Next is funding for Main Street landing improvements. So these are this next iterations. So in 2023, $1 million, 2025, $1 million, and 2027, $1 million.
Alderwoman Lee.
Clay, we talked about this. Could you give me an update on the total cost when it's completed and ready to use for the Quinlan Landing?
So for N5, a pure contract, I'm going to round here, but it's about 2.4 million.
Okay, and that includes the lights?
Yes.
And when will it be ready for use?
Should be ready to go this spring.
Okay. And what was originally budgeted for it?
It was, so the budgeting for Main Street Landing is done in increments. So it's unlike most projects where you're like, here's $2.4 million, all right, now go do it. To be able to initiate this project, we kind of started and then budget for it as we went. So it's right around what we expected.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Alderman Johnson.
And then Clay, are there mechanisms in place to make sure that this money coincides with the Riverfront Flood Resiliency Program versus competes? I mean, we had the Destination Playground, which we put pause on, justifiably so, to make sure that, we're not getting ahead of ourselves sometimes.
So the destination play area, that funding is currently sitting there and it's ready to go for whenever the council gives a thumbs up. From a budgeting perspective, we did take 22 off, so that's why there isn't any money. So we wanted to wait back to see what the flood resiliency study came back with before we re-engaged that conversation.
No. Okay. Alderman Dunn. I'm sorry, Alderman Dorman. The D confused me.
I'll take that as a compliment. But Clay, so jumping to this slide, exact same question that Ben has. This one, we are funding in 2022.
Yep.
Any concern with this one and flooding?
Not necessarily, no.
Just elevation wise, or?
Yep.
Okay.
All right, okay, Alderwoman Lee.
I've got a couple of questions on Veterans Memorial, and one of them is, it is in the floodplain. The overlook is in the floodplain, and the water did get up to the current area of the park. I've got, older pictures from aerial photos that show it gets up there. This is under GO funding. I've got a couple of concerns. Do we have any private donations for this yet? Because I know that that's supposed to be part of the funding for this. From Friends of the Park.
I can check with Chad. I know that they've been in the process of doing that. Just for contextual purpose, context purposes, what we said, I'm going to just, 4 or 5 years ago, we, as the city said that in 2022, we're going to set aside X amount of dollars to move this next phase of this project forward. If the nonprofit group could raise money and they need to match, we'll meet that and we'll bring that forward. If not, 2022 is when we were going to perform the project. So at this point, we're at fiscal year 2022, so we've kind of continued to keep our commitment to that, which is why that funding source is here now.
And I will.
Yes. Yes.
No, you're carry on.
The other concern I've got is part of this money is going towards prep for the next phases, and part of that is to prepare for the prairie. You've got a really bad invasive species problem that is really spread back there. It's that brambly, nasty invasive species. You've got the same problem, Rick, over in your park on the backside of your levees, okay? I'm not, a lot of, I've worked with invasive species a lot, and it can take years, if ever, to get rid of some of those species, and this one is one that really spreads. It's extensive back there. It's not something you just take a bulldozer and clean it up, or just spray the heck out of it with Roundup, I think. I think you need to work with an expert on what it is and what can be done and how long it's going to take. And I think, because you can make invasive plant species a lot worse by thinking you're getting rid of them and you don't. So I've got that, and this is a one-year thing, 2022. I mean, after that, it's zero. So it's increased $300,000. It is in the floodplain and the flood area, not just the plain, but in the area. You've got damaged trees. Every tree in that circle has damage on the trunk up there, and the sign was damaged. I haven't checked the sign lately, but the wooden sign has damage on it as well. So I'm kind of concerned that there's been no private donations, that there's some severe constraints that we haven't looked into, I think, enough, and that it's in the flood area, and that's increased $300,000 with no idea of what that $300,000 is for, just from last year to this year.
So the idea being for the increase in the budget is the Overlook Park or the Overlook section was originally what that $500,000 is for. And I know Bush Construction has offered their services in kind of estimating some things. So our last conversation with them, I think that Overlook Park isn't quite at that 500,000. So it's one of those things you can accomplish something, you'll have leftover money. If you put a little extra money, you can probably get something that, in a couple of years, we've done a REAP grant, and some of that extra, it's kind of right what you're talking about, just north of that Overlook area, is I feel like we can accomplish within the budget constraints. So that's what we're going to try and do as we move forward.
Okay, I just wanted to express my, with no disrespect to veterans, and I understand the point, but I think there's some serious constraints here that maybe haven't been thought about or addressed. I mean, the design looks wonderful, but just making sure that it's feasible and will actually work and it's resilient. And I'm particularly concerned about the invasive plant species being a real problem back there. Okay. And there's people living back there occasionally too. I've walked that area through the invasive species.
Are you good, Alderman Lee?
Thank you.
So I'll chime in. This has been a commitment for 10 years. The Friends of Veterans Memorial Park. I was a founding member and original member, and there have been many designs, and we've worked every month they meet for 10 years. All those concerns have been considered, and for people who don't know, I apologize if I go too long, you can cut me off there, Alderman Grip. This was a massive city task force that was formed to do this and decide through 23 different parks to decide where to go, and the commitment, and there's been tons of private money raised. There's a big sign right at the park that says many people and places of what they committed. Bush Construction, as Clay mentioned, that's $250,000 of commitment there. This was a huge commitment, and the overall park design, all those things you said are taken into consideration, but that's not why we're going that way. They're going the other way so that they don't mess with that. I would ask no one to please take this away. Thank you. Okay. Alderman Grip.
Thank you, Your Honor. If I could just make a few comments about this park and then the other riverfront parks. So for one thing, when we're talking about river flooding, passive parkland is the best type of land that you can have close to the riverfront. The water comes up, it goes back down, you clean up the park. You're not cleaning up buildings that have now been destroyed by the water. So going to greenway and passive space on our riverfront has always been part of the plan. You can build out public infrastructure to be, or park infrastructure to be very flood resilient. With anything we do on the riverfront, Main Street Landing, River Heritage Park, Veterans Park, that is all taken into account when we do it. The second thing is the 3 riverfront parks that the city's been committed to as long as I've been on the council, and before that, as Mayor Mattson said, is building out River Heritage Park, Main Street Landing, Veterans Memorial Park. Those are our 3 big ones. We kind of rotate the money through them, and we're working to build into, you know, what we call the world-class riverfront, which we believe we have, but we need to continue with. And then the third thing is I get a lot of questions about, you know, the money we spend on parks and riverfront development, which are all parks, same pot of money. And my response is always, the vast majority of our budget goes to all of the basic services. I mean, 95% of our budget is basic services. Okay, the money we are giving to the riverfronts and parks is no more than 5%. To me, that's the quality of life money that we spend. You cannot ignore quality of life, and it's all about, do you have the right proportion? And in my opinion, right, I'm an infrastructure guy, I'm a streets guy, that's where our money's going. We're doing it methodically, but you don't spend 100%. You gotta have some quality of life stuff. And these parks and the riverfront stuff, less than 5%, huge impact on quality of life. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Clay, carry on.
Good segue into infrastructure. So the next series of maps are my favorite one. I think they tell a success story of what the city has done and what the city continues to do. So we're gonna start going into our sanitary sewers. So what you see before you is a contract sewer repair program in the next fiscal year, about 1.2 million. That's consistent throughout the 6-year program to about $7 million. This is the emergency sinkholes that develop. We have operating crews who address those, but the larger ones and sometimes the quantity that we have, it's best that we have contracts available to utilize. So you can see those that have been addressed since 2013. Next is the sewer lateral repair program. So about $1.2 million, an increase from $1 million is what we've historically done because of the popular nature of this program. And then 7.2 million over a 6-year period. Essentially, when you have a lateral failure, the homeowner can pay a $500 deductible, utilize a city contract, which we generally have, I think, about 4 to 6 in a given year, and then the city will eat the cost of about up to $10,000.
Alderman Dunn.
I just want to say real quick, this is probably one of the better programs I've seen come around. So.
And I'll do to that. You can see the impact. A couple years ago, we had major flooding along Duck Creek and other places. People's basements were messed up big time. The council was wonderful in deciding to do this. I agree. One of the best programs we've ever done. And it continues to pay off. Thank you.
Because if we had not, then it'd be all on the property owner.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Alderman Dunn, do you have another comment?
Next is our manhole rehabilitation program. So in 2023, about $2 million, and 24 million, and then 850,000 in 2027. I'd say everything in blue is manholes that we have already rehabilitated. The one reasons of this is being important, manholes are could be a significant source of inflow and infiltration into the system. Our goal is to remove that. So basically everything that's in the sanitary system is what should be there and not what shouldn't. Because when water from whatever source gets into the system, that's what could potentially cause backups in our residential property. So we want to eliminate that completely. This plays a large portion. What is in orange, there's not many, but what's in orange is what's going to be let in the next coming months. As part of that, as part of our lining program, which we'll discuss earlier, and then green is what's going to be done in the future as part of those. We always talk about doing studies, and then a lot of times fall off on the recommendations of those studies. Once we do those areas in green in the coming years, we'll actually have completed all of our studies, and we actually need to do more because we actually, big, huge check mark for the city of Davenport when it comes to our manhole program.
Alderman Condon.
Not to turn everything into an art project, but I noticed when I was in Janesville, Wisconsin, that their manholes say Janesville, Wisconsin on it. And not everywhere in the city would benefit from that, but some of our Main Street landing projects or city parks, again, I'm just all about tying people to the city and building that pride.
Next is our lining program. So this kind of works in conjunction with our manhole program. So lining of sanitary sewers essentially allows us to have structural stability. So what we do is basically create a pipe within a pipe. So we don't have to excavate a roadway to put a new sewer in. It's extremely cost-effective way of continuing to utilize our current sewer system. So $1 million in 2022, $2 million in 2025. The area that you see in orange is what probably in March is we're looking to bid out a package that'll probably be using current year money around $3 million. So, you know, we're looking at another significant investment in our sewer system. Next is inflow and infiltration removal program. This is a pot of money, so $1.4 million in the next fiscal year to start addressing areas that we know that are a combined system. So where the storm sewer and the sanitary sewer actually combine into one pipe. Our goal is to remove those. And so as you can see, we've methodically moved mostly along the riverfront because that's where your big, huge I&I issues are. But then in particular, one at Prospect Park is probably our next one in the next calendar year. So about $6.4 million over a 6-year program for this. And then the next one is the largest one we've done, largest sewer project we've done in some time. So completed the 1930s riverfront. I mean, in total, about a $10.5 million project. This was one that was identified and required by the Iowa DNR and the EPA that the city performed. So about $1.3 million in the next fiscal year. This will complete that project. I would suspect, and it pretty much goes from the east side of the city all the way to a far side of the west. I would suspect this project probably completed around April in total. I know it was a huge traffic issue for people because we were closing lanes of River Drive all throughout the summer and fall, but this has really been a success story for the city.
Clay, just to clarify your 2 slides, you click in there, that's the same 1.3, you just kind of fit it all into one slide? Is that?
Yep, just to show you the scale of this project. So, next, while we're also fixing our current infrastructure, we're also thinking long-term. So the next 2 slides takes that into consideration. So Duck Creek North Extension Phase 1, I believe a week ago, Corey kind of talked a little bit about a future industrial site on the west side of town. We need sewer infrastructure out there. So this would be kind of the first phase of that. So about $3 million. And it's kind of in the middle to out years of completing that. This would, if I go out a little bit, the second phase would be pushing it out here to open up this particular portion of the city for development. So, and then the next one would be the Silver Creek Parallel Trunk Sewer. So about $1.5 million in 2027, and this is purely for design. This would be adding capacity up in our existing park, industrial park system. The next one is the Tremont sanitary interceptor replacement. So in 2023, $1 million, and in 2024, about $2.1 million. This would be installing a new sewer system. So the items that you see in orange is what it would be building. What you see in green is the current system, the current sewer system. The problem or the emphasis for this particular project is at this intersection where you see some manholes, and or this one, and then at this one, the manholes are about 30 feet deep. So if we were to replace or do some maintenance on those things, we would be creating quite a hole in the middle of that intersection. And then those sewer lines run underneath people's homes. This would create a much more efficient system from a long-term sustainability perspective. Next is we start getting into stormwater. So Nahant Marsh grant support. So Nahant Marsh is currently in the process of applying for a grant. I believe up to their capital program is around $3.7 million is their overall goal. They're looking for about $200,000 of commitment from the city. This provides it over a 3-year process. This would be purchasing, I believe, about 140 acres of property that they will then turn around and restore. That can be used for wetland purposes, as well as some educational and recreational trails as well. So this would be the city's commitment overall to that particular campaign funds.
Clay, Alderman Dorman, please. I'm done. I'm just gonna keep doing it.
So as somebody who's been on the stormwater committee since day one, you know, I'm really concerned that we're using stormwater money to fund a trail. You know, I come in probably 5 times a week, and my biggest concern is I've got an orange cone here, I got an orange cone here. On this catch basin, this catch basin, this catch basin. I come in on a daily basis and complain about this catch basin isn't clean, these storm sewers isn't clean. This money is not a huge pot of money for this program, and I don't think this is the best use of that money. I'm not saying it's not a good project, I just wish it was funded out of something else other than stormwater, because we have, sump pump abatement, which is on there, and I've screamed about that for years, that that's a big bang for a buck, but yet it never gets funded, and it's not gonna get funded for another 3 years, so that's just my 2 cents worth, and
Okay, moving on.
Next, some pump abatement. So this would be putting in a permeable alley, so just south of Central Park, right around Columbia and Keeling in the Pacific area. They have icing issues on this particular one, so this would be putting in a permeable system to kind of help with that process. So that'd be fiscal year 2022 at about $360,000. New storm sewer on the 800 block of Pine Acre, and it's in the 26-27 timeframe. This one in particular, as you can kind of see, well, if I can do it correctly, or maybe it doesn't want me to do it. One of the reason for this one is that you can see this is where the existing storm sewer is. If we needed to go in and do maintenance, do point repairs, we're digging into people's yards. So this would be putting the storm sewer in the public right of way. So when we ever need to maintain it or replace it, way down into the future, it's out of people's property.
Alderman Ambrose.
Thanks, Your Honor. Clay, Dover Court and Division is a area that every time we get an inch or more is under 5 foot of water, it becomes a traffic hazard. This has been discussed many times. Our police department has to go out and close it off till it finally drains. Substandard storm system there, but on a high traffic street. Why don't you, when you have some time, take a look at that and do a little history. Thanks.
Yes, sir.
Alderman Jobson.
Thank you. One of my greatest learnings this year has been about sanitary sewer lines, and thank you, Alderman Dunn, for all your coaching this year, as there is an issue at the intersection of 18th and Marlowe. And one of the questions I've asked in regards to this specific project, Clay, and please clarify for me, and for those of you who've seen the 6th Ward needs a new sewer line, this is not why that yard sign campaign is going on, but this project has no bearing on the issues that are caused at that intersection, why there's still pumps and hoses that block that intersection, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so it won't affect that at all.
Thank you. Alderwoman McGinnis.
Thank you, Your Honor. I just had a question, and I see we're in the middle of storm sewers, but and going back to the Tremont Sanitary Interceptor replacement. So when you're laying these new lines, then you are opening streets up, correct?
Correct.
And you are doing new sewer connections to the houses?
Correct.
So we're actually getting out of this in some of, especially the Tremont, we're going to have houses with new sewer connections that they don't, it's a benefit. They're not going to have to pay for that, right? So,
No, yeah.
Okay.
We would want to ensure that when we put a new system in, that everyone is properly connected to it.
Right, okay. All right, thank you.
Next, continuing the theme of sump pump discharges. So Douglaby in 2023, about 50,000 for this particular road to connect it to the sewer system, or the storm sewer system, excuse me.
Clay, while we're there, can we extend that project to making that a normal road? This one section here is like almost a single lane, single pass road that then connects to a modern normal type road. Is if we're in there ripping up, putting in storm sewer, could we think about upgrading the road as well?
Widening the
at same
road.
time?
Okay. Next is so 66th Street, excuse me, is extending the storm sewer once again to alleviate some pump discharge areas on this particular road just east of Division. So 150,000 in the next fiscal year. Stream repair programs. We have two In fiscal year '22, about $50,000 for small-scale contract stream repair to help augment what we're doing in-house, and then $150,000 through the '23 to '25, and then stream stabilization program in '26 and '27, both at $110,000. What you see on the map is all of the streams and creeks and tributaries within the city of Davenport. I know in the last couple years, we've had some pretty significant stream bank stabilization projects. The ones that come to mind are Duck Creek, several sections of Duck Creek. I believe Silver Creek had some, and then obviously the city council is just awarded one for Blackhawk Creek. So in total, I believe it's over about 1.5 million in between all those three, but this is putting money aside to do those just kind of as placeholders. Next is everyone's favorite topic, the streets. So we typically break, from our maintenance perspective, we break it up into two separate buckets. The high volume street repair program, which is typically, not always, but typically your arterials and your collectors. They're the ones that kind of move people from point A to point B, and then your neighborhood streets. The first one we'll go over is the high volume street network. What you see in front of you is that pavement condition index. So roughly every 2 years, we get a score from, it's the Iowa State Extension via the Iowa Department of Transportation that they drive the roads, and there's a lot of variables and a lot of formulas that they utilize to come up with these things. They're good guidelines for us to go off of. It's not the end-all be-all, but they are good guides to show. And you can kind of see the condition index based on the color. And then to Alderman Dorman's request from last week, we'll be giving you a map that you can utilize and click on those, and then you can kind of see. But then to kind of give you an idea, talking about pavement life cycle. So if you take a brand new pavement, 100%, it's great, and then over the years, it will deteriorate over time. According to what type of treatment you use is what costs it has, as well as if you can catch it in the early years, it's not that big of a cost. If you can catch it in the middle, it's a little bit more expensive. If you're talking full reconstruction, it's a lot more money. So in a perfect world, you'd be catching it on the front end and extending that life cycle out. So it's like at this point, and wait, and then bump it up before you start having to get to these much higher dollar figures. That's just everything in theory. So for high volume streets, in the 2020 program, we've got about 4.6 million identified, about 22.5 in the 6-year in the other 5 years. What you see on the map is since 2015, the areas in blue are what we have been able to accomplish since that time frame, and then the areas in orange, which I have provided you our recommended street plan for the upcoming calendar year, are the ones we look to accomplish using this program. So just for some highlights, Marquette, so 5th to 12th, it'll probably be the large-scale reconstruction, kind of mirroring what we did at Divisions last year. Big resurfacing for the next year would be Hickory Grove.
Okay, you have a couple. Alderman Grove.
Thank you. So I did want to make some comments and I wondered how long this would take entering into my 6th year on council. We start getting comments that the roads are actually getting better, and this is the year that happened for me, where people are approaching me and saying that they are seeing a significant improvement in our road system, and my answer is yes. If we continue this for the next 15 to 20 years, we'll be very happy with it. So it takes you decades to get there, it takes you decades to get out of it, but the commitment to not building new roads, to taking our federal and state dollars to putting them into road repair and replacement, to fully funding maintenance. And then also one of the better things I've seen is taking that PCI number and making our decisions based off of data rather than feelings. And so having done that now for several years, I just want to say that people are starting to take notice, and over the next 5 years, I think we'll be in a much better place.
Alderman Dorman.
Yeah, Clay, thank you for getting that PCI list together. I'd love to see that. But when you send that, could you maybe take the PCI, mesh it up with like this list, and maybe give some explanations as to why some of these glaring red ones from your previous slide are being passed on, so we can maybe have that thought process that you guys have of why what to me, some of the worst roads are not being addressed now and why.
Not to dive too much into the weeds, because I don't want to take up so much time, because I know we've been here for a while, but sometimes that's what I would caution, and I'll put that, just my personal disclaimer in the email. When you look at the pavement condition index, it's not okay, this road is a 0, so that's the first road we're going to do that year. That's not necessarily how we do it, because in particular, the high volume street, we run it through a pavement deterioration model. It's called DTIMS, I think is what it's called. But it also takes into effect traffic counts, just the high volume, not the neighborhood ones, but just the high volume. So, and then some of it also takes into account the best uses of your money. So at 4.8 million, here's the best, it will run the program on a data oriented methodology, and it will tell you this is the best way to use your funding. Now, that's a program. That doesn't mean that's always the best thing, but that's what it uses as a guide. Sometimes when you look at it, you'll be like, okay, so Division Street in particular last year, I think it gets 11,000 cars a day. If it's in the same pavement condition index as something that gets 2,000 cars a day, which is a better benefit cost to the city? Some of those things are taken into consideration. Also, when you're looking at the 0 to 20, so they're really bad, you're generally talking full reconstruction. So if you remember that pavement deterioration chart, full reconstruction is probably anywhere between $120 to $140 a square yard. If you're talking resurfacing, so I'll go back to Jersey Ridge Road. Jersey Ridge, it needed it, absolutely, but it didn't need full reconstruction, it just needed resurfacing. So it's probably half the cost of what reconstruction is. So some of that is not necessarily just focusing on your bad ones, is how can you best utilize the funding that you have to give the best benefit to the city. And that's a little bit of, there's some nuance in there, instead of just saying, here's your roads, ranked 1 through 50, and we just start ticking off those things. But happy to give all that information, or sit down at any point you want to, and we can kind of walk through some of those things.
Yeah, it's just, 2 of my favorite roads that I'll choose to go home from, both Main Street and Pershing.
Yep.
Those are ones that you're driving on a rocky road, basically, of bumps. And so just understanding maybe that we have a bigger plan, or we're waiting to do like a sewer project with it, or, other things like that, I think would be nice to tackle some of those visibly obvious bad roads, and why we maybe are going to wait till a later time to do it, just so we have the narrative.
On Maine, one of the things Corey has kind of asked me to do is when people talk about Maine, they talk about different sections. So it's according to who you talk to is what section they're talking about. And so she kind of tasked me with getting all the stakeholder groups together and focusing on a plan, so that we don't spend X amount of public funding and then really it kind of looks, it looks pretty bad, because you go from one section looks a certain way, another section looks another way. So that's something she's asked me to do for the year, to provide a plan or a series of plans to the city council for you guys to make a decision kind of moving forward. I'll just use a quick example. Some people in their plans, whether it's the downtown or the Davenport Go plan, do you want your on-street bikes, or do you want them off-street? Do you want to narrow the curb line in, or do you want to keep the existing curb? What you do between 5th and 12th will then affect what you do between River Drive and 5th, or between 12th and Locust. Those kinds of things, to make sure we have something consistent going on. Yep.
Thank you. Alderwoman Lee. Okay, so yes, on Maine, someone who drives it a couple times a day, thank you for that. I agree with the differences, but that educational corridor, thanks for doing it. I will submit, thank you for having the data, thank you for putting the pieces together, because again, being an alderman like you guys all, everybody has their projects and pets, and we'd love to do the 900 miles of streets that we have every session, but we need to, that's why we have you guys. We'll give you our input, and you guys put the data together and then provide your best product to us, and then we can discuss it. But I appreciate your work and all the detail that I have seen you put into how you determined to give this council a recommendation of streets. And quite frankly, in my opinion, after a long time, struggling with challenging you when I was an alderman, you got to do this. Now seeing the city, I thank you so much for what you do, because it is hard to put all those together, but we need to trust your judgment in most cases. for that, so thank you. Alderwoman Lee.
Actually, that was perfect, because I have another question not related to that. Because this is a good map. Could you bring it down a little bit so we can see how West 76 relates to I-80? Yeah, thank you. There was 190,000 for traffic signals there at 76th, and
So I have that in another slide.
Oh, do you have it?
Yes. So do
Never-
you just want to wait then and for us to get
never
through
you
this?
mind.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, if you don't mind.
No, that's
Okay.
fine.
Cool. Carry on.
Next is neighborhood streets. So once again, what you're seeing is the PCI scores of what is considered a local road, so a non-arterial or collector, so no Division, no Jersey Ridge, no Central Park, those kinds of roads. That's what the PCI scores look like. We have neighborhood street program. I believe it was with Alderwoman McGinnis's suggestion a couple of years ago. We've actually combined our internal street dollar figure and our contracted street dollar figure. So that's where you get in the fiscal year 22, there's a $4.4 million, $26.7 million over a 6-year time period. So what we'll first talk about is our internal crews. We very briefly talked about at the beginning of this presentation, they are constrained to what they can do with the equipment, with some state regulations. But typically they work on these are asphalt related roads. And as Alderman Ambrose has pointed out, those are typically either south of Locust or south of Central Park. So you see their proposed plan in orange. I will say with a little bit of caveat, unless nature decides to throw a third natural disaster at us, we feel pretty confident that we can accomplish this plan. And then what's before you, obviously, if it does throw a third one our way, these are the crews that we utilize to help with cleanup or flood fighting. So some of that is dependent on their availability. So
I'll comment just to remind, yeah, thanks for knocking on wood, but a couple years ago, we didn't have this. You see the significant investment because our citizens asked us to get some work going on neighborhood streets, the amount of money we're putting in, and quite frankly, the amount of work that our staff is committed to contract out or to do ourselves. Just think of going back, if we would not have this right now, and in our discussion going forward, this is a big deal, and our folks want us to do that. So I would ask that everybody keep this in mind as you have other discussions about adding other programs. Thank you. Alderman Jobson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Clay, thanks again for answering my email this week. On the neighborhood street repair program, it's great to see, funds kind of coming, kind of shifting a little bit more into that program versus the high volume streets. So it's good to see that commitment. Still, my disappointment as a ward alderman, and Mayor Mattson's spoke about it, eloquently about, we all kind of have our priorities, and we want to kind of pull on the strings, and then touch on, Alderman Dunn when he spoke about, the alleys to Alderman Ambrose. If we want to consider these alleys as streets, maybe we present that data to the alderman, and then we make those decisions. Tying that back into my disappointment and to my email, I'd still love to see the process a little differently, where, maybe the council, from a ward level, when we start looking at these contracted neighborhood programs, can we have a way in which there's a little bit better input from us, versus, okay, here's what's going on. Because when we get residents emailing us, calling us, and we see some of these streets that we believe that, hey, they're pretty high priority. I've mentioned Hamilton Drive on multiple occasions to you. It's a neighborhood road that is also a bus route, similar to what Alderwoman McGinnis mentioned on 8th. And when I don't see that on here versus, a 38th, which obviously it's going to be a shorter section of road, costs less. We take all these things into consideration, but it's like, and I mentioned to you before, I'd love to be able to swap 38th for Hamilton in some way, shape, or form. So as I ramble, and then my thoughts are going, I'd still looked, and if any of my other colleagues share some of these thoughts with me and sentiments, if there's a way in which we can look at, how as a council do we have some kind of pot within the pot that says, hey, you might be able to do this. If you think this street's more of a priority than this, then let's talk about it versus here's what's happening. And now those 70, 100 residents that are calling you that aren't happy with you, you got to go explain to them why their street isn't fixed and you couldn't do a darn thing for them. And so I apologize for rambling, but again, is there's a way in which we can kind of tweak this system just a little bit better to have a little bit better input from the council for some of these neighborhood street programs, because going back to the community survey, which was presented to us last week, only 15% of our residents in that survey believe our roads are good or very good. That leaves a pretty significant portion, and I know it'll take a lot of time, and the commitment we make is great, but again, as a ward alderman, I'd love to see a way in which we can have a little bit better impact within our neighborhoods, within our wards.
So I'll just say it was an interesting way we did it. We used to take each alderperson and the alderman at large, so 10 people, and say, what's your number one road? I mean, I remember participating in that, and that's what you'd get done. What ended up happening was nowhere close to what the ones that, in most people's opinion, certainly if I said I want this street done, that's mine, you guys might say, well, that doesn't seem like a very good, but we did that. We went away from that because it ended up taking money to streets that really didn't need it, but that was my point. I get your point. Maybe, Ms. Spiegel, we should maybe have a little bit better index of some sort, look at an input matrix or something, I don't know. So I don't know.
So-
You guys can talk about this later in a workshop or something, or even talk with Ms. Spiegel and see, because I think they fine-tuned it pretty good, but talk with and see what they could come up with. I don't know, that's just a thought. Alderman
Mayor,
Dorman.
what I
Go
might
ahead.
recommend on that is, much like some of the discussion topics we've talked about, I think if you understood the level of care that goes into picking the streets, because we're not emotionally attached, because we don't have your constituents calling us. We are looking at data and costs, and so it's a little more methodical on our side. And I think if we explain that to you, it might help create a higher level of confidence in how we get to the list that you get.
Alderman Dorman.
Yeah, and my only suggestion to piggyback off that is, Clay, maybe if next year when we do this in November, December, one of those timeframes, we do a special Tuesday 1-hour workshop where you give us this exact presentation that you give us now, then before you put this all together, where we then maybe can have these discussions or give you these specific concerns before you create your plan. So then I feel like that would be a good balance of Alderman Jobin could still tell you like, hey, I have this very specific concern that you might not know about. And then we're also not the sole chooser of what roads. So we're not getting to Chicago type politics where we pick winners and losers. So.
Good. All right, Karen.
And I'll just make a quick comment. If there's residents who may be, displeased that a certain road isn't being picked, I would say I'm more than happy to direct them my way. I field quite a few of those calls. That's my job. That's perfectly okay, and I can explain the process to them. Oftentimes, not the happiest, but that's perfectly like. So I'm more than happy to do that. And also throughout the year, if you feel like in particular there's a roadway that you would like, to be looked at by city staff, please feel free and reach out and provide those. We're happy to include those. So just taking a look, this is the second component. So this is what we're talking about, the contracted street. To the mayor's point, the first time this was even funded was in fiscal year 2019. We're talking about fiscal year 22. So it's a very short-lived program, and it's already grown. Specifically, the contracted amount, it started in the first year as $1 million, and it's grown to $3 million. So it's kind of continuing that theme of neighborhood reinvestment as we move forward. So the items in orange are the ones that we're planning to do in the next construction season or the next calendar season. It's what's on your list, as well as what our internal crews are and some of our other specialty projects. So if you have any questions, please always feel free to reach out. Next is 53rd Street reconstruction and widening. This is cost for phase 2. So this is Eastern to Elmore Circle. So $2 million in the next year budget, $2 million of city money in the following budget with a $3.7 million grant, kind of moving forward. Recently, I think it's on your current council cycle is the approval of the federal grant agreement that will go forward on that one. Tentative timeframe for this for construction or bid is this time next year is what we would like to do. So about $7.7 million. The next large-scale street rehabilitation project that we'll be doing is 3rd and 4th Street. So once again, to Alderman Grip's point, a couple years ago, we kind of shifted priority because of the council and the mayor. Instead of building new roads, we rehabilitate we use federal funding to rehabilitate existing roadways. So this would be 3rd and 4th Street from Telegraph to Harrison. So you see money in like that 300,000 in 22 is to start doing some sewer investigation. And in a perfect world, we would take care of those sewer issues before we jump straight into the big road project, which in 24 has 1.8 million of city money to match a $7.3 million grant.
Alderwoman McGinnis.
Thank you, Your Honor. If you could, because there's been from time to time and more now bubbling up discussion, as there's some discussion in the future about the two ways downtown, there is a conversation, well, you're leaving out the west end on the two ways. And if you would, for this council's, and I think I've had conversation with you about that, for this council, if you could just explain the ramification, I mean, this is a huge federal project, and the ramifications of not being able to necessarily do that because of some strictures in the planning of this. Could you talk about that a little bit?
So the way that when we wrote the grant that was approved, it was pure street repair and street work. It didn't include any changes to the traffic engineering of that corridor. So when you do those, you need to abide by what you specifically asked for on this federal grant. So that's where on that street project, we have separated it. It's its own special thing. It doesn't include anything involving the two-way. So that's what that funding is set aside for. The next project, so the next slide was the two-way conversion. So about 1.7 million in 2024, 600,000 of that is being committed by the Downtown Partnership. That was their specific request to put it in there. Their decision, if my memory is correct, was from Marquette to River Drive. Part of that is, it's a good cutoff point but obviously from a budgetary perspective, if you go all the way to Telegraph, if that's what everyone wants to do, I think they're fine with that. But then it obviously increases the full cost of the project. Yep.
For that explanation, I appreciate it.
Alderwoman Lee.
And that was my question too. Thank you, Marion. I was looking at it last night and thinking, why did we stop at Marquette and not, let's say, Division for that? And I'm thinking of the small businesses and things along just that stretch.
I mean, I certainly think if we wanted to take it to Division, I'll go back and look at the plan. But once again, the partnership, they funded a traffic study that specifically looked at this. I can go back to what it said. It's been a couple of years.
It was like 2012, this plan, I think. I pulled that out of my head. And it went to Marquette. So that, when they did the 3rd and 4th Street, the application for the huge amount of federal dollars that are going, that was, they didn't do that because that was not ever, and actually, historically, people had not necessarily wanted it. And so it's an interesting change, maybe an attitude about it for sure. But so that's a little bit of the background.
Oh, okay, thank you. I'm just thinking about small businesses right there. And then, okay, thank you.
And other people putting money in instead of just us was the big thing, so. Okay, carry on.
Next is alley repair program. So 150 in 2023, 650,000 over the 6-year period. What you see is over the last couple years is the locations of the alleys that we have done the neighbors that have participated in the program. So once again, this funding source and the thought process behind it is as we continue along with the current council level policies and procedures that are in place, obviously if we change that, then that takes other things into consideration.
I would just like to point out real quick there, Clay, that we have plenty of alleys north of Locust that also need addressed too. So don't, you see there in the middle court. Don't forget about us.
The next series of projects is traffic signal replacement upgrades. Alderman Lee, this is where, in the 6-year program, we have several. The one that's had us in fiscal year 2022 is $45,000 from the city. We're going to go out and seek a state grant for about $55,000 for a total project of $100,000 to put a light at Brady and Lombard. And then you can kind of see as we kind of march through the 6-year, particular upgrades or replacements of existing traffic signals. The map will show you where those things are located from a location specific. But then you can kind of see moving forward. Alderman Lee, yours is in particular right here that you wanted to bring up.
Actually, a 2-1.
So Brian Shadd, our city engineer, is doing the historical research into previous crash data, because it's only been about 2 or 3 years since 76th Street has been opened up because of the extension.
Right.
So there's not a lot of data there. But what he's found, I think it says like 6 crashes, and almost all of them probably wouldn't have helped to have a traffic light there, because the people just completely forgot to yield, if I remember correctly.
And
so
there's
it's
also
like
donuts. You can see where people have been doing donuts.
So
at the intersection.
there's when they do traffic reports, they put the reasons why, and sometimes you can see whether or not people would even pay attention for those. But we'll continue to look at it, and we'll continue to see ways that we can address it.
I'd appreciate that. I just don't want any more accidents that could be avoidable, especially with the more trucks. Thanks.
Next is Eastern at Veterans Memorial Roundabout. So in a middle of the future year, about $629,000 of city funds. We'll try to leverage a federal grant with this, about 1.7 or 2.3. And this would be to put the roundabout there. What is there now are temporary lights. They're not permanent ones as we go forward. And those were in association with, obviously, the 53rd Street project. Last is our water pollution control plant and compost flood mitigation project, phase 1. So in July, the city applied to the EDA, or to the Economic Development Authority, for emergency disaster funding to better protect our plant. What you see here is that first phase of what we submitted. So about 1.1 million in the upcoming fiscal year, 1.2 million in the following fiscal year, to leverage an over $9 million grant. This will build up a berm, as you can see that's highlighted on the south side. It would build in a retention area, and then 2 pumping stations, a stormwater pumping station and an effluent pumping station. This will be the first phase of better securing our critical facility. Future phases would be to complete that berm structure around on the north side. But once again, because of the dollar figures associated, we're trying to take it off in manageable chunks. We've been having ongoing conversations with EDA. I think we feel pretty good about this particular project. I think we hopefully will hear back at some point in the spring.
Ms. Lee.
Thank you. I just want to say, after going through all this, it looks like you're doing a bang-up job getting grants. Massive, highly proportional grants compared to what the city has to put in. So I just wanted to give you kudos on that.
Anyone else? Clay, do you have?
That's
the end of your slides, right?
That's the end of my project slides, and I will just say from our finance team that this is the second of 3 of our work sessions. So this time we're at 8:30 on next Saturday. We'll talk through Corey's budget and her work plan.
Yeah, we have a couple other folks here, some trail end comments. I'll just give my quick thoughts. Again, thank you very much for your work, Ms. Spiegel, Ms. Mallory, Ms. Gleason, and everybody else in the city on providing the council a proposed budget. I know after next week, Ms. Spiegel will tell us how she's going to try and do this. And then Then she will, of course, still remember there is a public hearing on the budget. There's a presentation by Ms. Spiegel to the council on the budget. And then, of course, there's plenty of discussion between you folks on the council on the budget. And then, of course, you vote on the budget. But the work that goes in and the detail that you have provided, both on the operational and capital side, is excellent, both affirmed by our auditing agency and our bonding agencies. We just got the last one out, as you guys saw, from S&P, and the comments again reiterate the outstanding job and the financial situation that the city's in, and that is simply due to the excellent work that the staff and the council in collaboration working together to try and develop what quite frankly, the citizens of Davenport ask you to do, which is to fund public safety, infrastructure, bring jobs and economic development. And that's where the focus stays. Ms. Spiegel then will tell you how she's going to continue to execute what you want her to do. So I thank you. I want to take personal thanks again from the capital side and from the operational side, and then we'll see how you talk to us next week about how you're going to do it. So a couple follow-ons. Alderman Dorman.
Thank you, and yeah, thank you, Clay, and the entire county finance budget team that has put this all together. I really appreciate it. A couple of topics that we haven't talked about yet. First off, thank you for the late request from the Hilltop to get their master plan study, and that was definitely one that came in kind of at the 12th hour. And I saw you were able to get it in there in 2023, and after talking, I think that would be kind of perfect timing to have some discussions now and have the money to go away. So I appreciate that. On the negative end of money with our SMIDs, I noticed once again, Christie Street and the East Village got pushed out another year, and it seems to be traveling the wrong way in the capital improvement project. And so that is one that I don't want us to lose focus on the East Village. Downtown and now the Hilltop have been getting a lot of focus, and I want to make sure that we continue to gain our successes that we have down there. And particularly Christie Street would be a great event venue spot where it could kind of grow that entire region more than just the East Village itself. The other thing that we don't have yet that is coming, whether we want it or not, is a capital project and plan for Annie Whitmire. And that's one where we've done some investments on the north side of town, or the north side of Annie Whitmire, in relating to junior theater. But the south half, where Family Resources currently is starting to have some major issues. And after reading their contract last night, it states that our responsibility for that area is structural items, and those are the issues that are now kind of coming to head. So we'll definitely need to make sure that we're being proactive about that, getting that into these future years, because that's a storm, whether Family Resources is there or not, it's still our buildings and our property, so we need to make sure we're properly addressing that complex as well. That, I think, is all I have for my secondary comments. And once again, I just want to say thank you. I know it's a big task to take on, and you do it well, and we appreciate it.
Thank you. Alderman Grip.
Thank you, Your Honor. Alderman Dorman, I wasn't planning to speak on this, but in regards to the Christie Street project, when we had our work session with the SMIDs, one of the things that we asked was for that SMID to provide us direction on where they thought that project was going to go and if it was still a priority. I understand that you and Alderman Jojen have an excellent relationship with that SMID, and I'd be happy to support you as necessary, but I would ask that the two of you work with that SMID to get some direction on where they want to go and what kind of money they can put in, because I think what came out of that work session is you have a council who is very serious about being there to support them, but we need to ensure that they know where they want to go for us to do that. The second item I had on mine is the same as yours, which is Annie Whitmire. So over the last 5 years at different times, I've brought it up as a council goal. It hasn't scored that high. Alderwoman Rawson and I have taken several developers through Annie Whitmire to see if there's any interest in it, and it hasn't gone anywhere. But one of the things in the budget is spending, fairly significant money on junior theater, and we're talking in the hundreds of thousands at the Annie Whitmire complex. And I love the junior theater. I love what they're doing. I have serious concerns about putting capital dollars into Annie Whitmire without a comprehensive plan. The thing I would ask staff to do, and I don't know what we need to do as a council to get there, but we need to have Bruce's team start looking at ways that we can redevelop that site, because it is an old, quickly depreciating asset that, if we don't start taking action fairly soon, is going to become more and more expensive and maybe becomes unsavable at a certain point. So last thing for me that we didn't get to is the Florian Keene parking lot electricity. This is a big one for Farmers Market, Downtown Partnership, Riverfront Improvement Commission. It's a fairly cheap one. Alderman Ambrose and I have both supported it since last year. It's about $70,000 to upgrade the electrical so all of the vendors at the Farmers Market don't have to use generators. Currently budgeted in 24. I'd like to see that moved up to 23. When you talk about getting people to our riverfront and our downtown, the Farmers Market's one of the best ways we get people down there. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderwoman Dickman.
Still here, sorry. Of course, the screen goes black as soon as you pick it up. Just letting you know I'm still here. Thank you for everyone. I tend to try not to add anything if it's not necessary to make meetings go by shorter. So didn't interject a lot, but thank you to everyone for their hard work.
Thank you. Alderman Ambrose.
Thanks, Your Honor. Clay, great presentation. And Corey, your team does a great job, and I really appreciate it. You know, the city of Davenport's almost 200 years old. And when we do these budgets, it's all in balance. And I think our staff does a pretty incredible job. You know, I'm not afraid to share my perspective with our staff, and I appreciate the fact that they take the time to listen. So we're real fortunate. When I first came to the city council, the city budget was $185 billion. We're at $250,000 now. So, you know, our community is booming. We've done a lot of great things over that time. And we're so fortunate to have Corey and her team. And this budget process it continues to get better. And I think, Mike, how can you not be proud of where our city is at now? So once again, we're living in America's greatest city. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Hold pausing. All right, so I'll just say thank you for your work again. On behalf of the council and everyone else, we appreciate and look forward to, Ms. Spiegel, your discussions with us next week. Everyone have a good weekend then.